Chapter 178. Cocker Village had become a dead village. This shocking news suddenly began to spread in Blue Hill City and soon reached Nine's ears. According to some mercenaries who often went in and out of the Greenland forest, Cocker Village, which was near the edge of the forest, had become a dead village overnight. All the villagers had disappeared. What was surprising was that everything in the village was well preserved, including food, clothing, and shelter, as well as the furs and skins of the animals that the villagers treasured the most. The only thing that could not be found was that there were no survivors. From the villagers and hunters who were alive and kicking, to the hounds, cows, and sheep that were reared by every household, as long as they were alive, they had all disappeared. There were no clues or traces of them leaving. Several mercenaries who passed by there were scared out of their wits, and they kept saying that it was strange. After running back to Blue Hill City, they directly reported the matter to the mayor's office. Therefore, all kinds of rumors had stirred up Blue Hill City in a day. Some said that some monsters had escaped from the forest. Some said that they had been infected with some plague. And some were even more exaggerated, saying that some terrible evil had appeared there, just when the entire Blue Hill City was in a state of panic. Nine had already invited the few mercenaries into the camp to understand all the details in detail. Soon, on the same night, these hundreds of demon hunter knights suddenly left Blue Hill City and rushed like the wind to the Cocker Village where the mysterious disappearance occurred. More than 40 miles of mountain road was nothing to the demon hunter knights who were always on the move. Moreover, the ones who came on this trip were the elites of the demon hunter knights from all over the world. Therefore, they were not riding ordinary war horses, but a special kind of domesticated demon colt. This kind of demon colt was much taller and more powerful than ordinary war horses. It also had fangs and sharp teeth like the wild beasts in the forest. What was even more terrifying was that there were special scales on their bodies that were similar to scales that could resist the attacks of sharp objects. The demon hunter knights were rarely matched in this plane, and the demon colt played a big role in this. However, this kind of demonic colt could only be obtained by the elite demon hunter knights, so it was rare to see one in a small place like Blue Hill City. It was thanks to the demonic colt's nimble, beast-like bodies and sharp claws that were adept at leaping and climbing rocks that the entire demon hunter knights were able to rush to Cocker Village that was located halfway up the mountain. By the time they arrived, it was already close to dawn. A ray of white light had already appeared in the distant horizon. However, walking in the empty and dark village gave off a creepy feeling. Most of the demon hunters stayed outside the village. Those who followed Niente into the village were elites who had advanced to become spellbreakers. Apart from being proficient in all kinds of night battle techniques, there was also no lack of versatile people with special methods. Dozens of torches, each as thick as a person's arm, were erected all over the village. A few demon hunter knights who were adept at tracking immediately began a thorough search and inspection of Cocker Village. Soon, some hidden clues surfaced. A large number of strange insect molts and broken insect limbs were found. There was even a large number of torn clothes and some human limbs that had not been completely gnawed on in a thatched hut. Judging from all these signs, Cocker Village was suddenly attacked the night before yesterday. The direction of the attacker was vaguely pointing towards the northwest of the Greenland forest. As for the attacker, it was most likely some kind of terrifying insect monster. However, just as the elites of the demon hunter knights gathered together to discuss how to track this strange monster, the demon hunter knights who stayed outside the village suddenly let out a terrifying cry. "Bug! Bug! It's a bug! Everyone be careful!" The clamor caused Niente's expression to change. He leaped onto his demonic colt and charged out of the small village. The demon hunter knights who stayed outside the village were now in a panic. Under the illumination of the many torches, some of the knights near the forest kept stamping their feet as if they were fighting with something. Beside them, there were already 3 demon hunter knights lying on the ground, motionless. Niente had just rushed forward on his demonic colt when he was stunned by the horrifying scene before him. Scorpions, a large number of scorpions, a sea of scorpions that covered the entire mountain, The bodies of the 3 demon hunter knights that had fallen to the ground were crawling with terrifying black scorpions that kept wriggling. The sounds of them gnawing on their armor and bones rang out incessantly. 2 of the 5 demon hunter knights who were struggling in the swarm were stung by the pitch-black stingers of the scorpions, and they swayed as they fell. As for the remaining 3, they grabbed onto ropes thrown out by their companions and were dragged out of the swarm. "Where did these insects come from?" Niente asked loudly. "From a forest. They came out from the forest and ambushed us while we were resting." One of the elite knights who stayed behind replied in a loud voice, "Set them on fire. Burn them to death." Following Niente's shout, torches were thrown into the swarm like raindrops. Some demon hunter knights even tore down a few nearby hunters' wooden houses, throwing the thatch and old wooden planks into the sea of fire. Accompanied by the pungent smell of roasted meat and protein, the rampaging swarm finally showed some fear and returned to the forest like a tide. "My lord, look!" a demon hunter knight suddenly exclaimed loudly. Following the direction he pointed, Niente saw a strange black figure in the depths of the forest where the swarm of insects had disappeared with the help of the ray of dawn. It was a strange figure wrapped in a black robe. It was tall, and a pair of dark green eyes under the shadow of the hood was silently looking in their direction. "Evil!" Niente spat out each word hatefully. There was no need for him to remind them, as the dozen or so rune bows were already fully drawn. Clang, clang, clang. A series of explosive sounds rang out as a dozen or so flame arrows enshrouded in a crimson glow pierced through the pitch-black night sky, turning the forest where the black robe stood into a burning wheat field. The black robe's strange figure only flickered at the edge of the sea of fire before disappearing into the depths of the forest. "Give chase!" Niente waved his hand with all his might and turned to yell behind him, "Edward, slow down with the main force. I'll take a few people to stop him." With that, Niente and his 7 or 8 companions spurred on their demon colts and disappeared into the dark forest in the blink of an eye. The red sun in the distant horizon was already halfway up its body, and the darkness in the forest was receding step by step. The faint mist was dispersed by the rising sun, bringing a gust of damp air to the forest. That strange figure kept flashing in the depths of the forest in the distance. Niente shot a few flame arrows with his bow, but they were all evaded by him and did not slow him down even a little. The demon colts were like terrifying demons traversing the forest, climbing over cliffs and crossing over creeks. The demon colts only needed a leap over a small hill that was 30 feet tall, and their sharp claws only needed a little leverage to cross it. The demon colts could traverse even the most rugged and steep mountain paths as if they were flying and treading on flat ground. These well-trained demon hunters crouched slightly on the back of the demon colts, following their leaps and leaps. They galloped through the vines, shrubs, and weeds that were as tall as half a human's height, chasing closely after the strange figure that flickered in and out of existence. This wasn't because the demon hunters were arrogant and fearless, but because it had long been their battle style and habits. On the demon hunter continent, evildoers were few in number and were always the target of pursuit. It was very difficult for them to form a large enough force. Therefore, the demon hunters would chase after the evildoer to the death if they discovered one. They would rarely consider the possibility of an ambush. But little did they know that as they galloped through the dense forest, a strange figure was following behind them, rapidly approaching from the treetops. It was a group of strange blood-sucking bats. They had wide bat wings and nimble movements, gliding nimbly between the tall, ancient trees as they approached the team of demon hunters without a sound. A veteran demon hunter stayed at the back of the team. The demon colt he was riding was a little old, so its stamina and explosiveness couldn't compare to his companions. After half an hour of galloping, he had pulled more than 10 meters away from his companions in front of him. With the demon colt's speed, this distance wasn't considered falling behind at all. But even so, it still attracted an unexpected and terrifying attack. Although he didn't hear any sound, his years of sharpening his sense of danger still made him realize that something was wrong behind him. He reached out to the hilt of his sword alertly crouched slightly, and turned his head to look behind him. There was no movement in the dark forest, and he couldn't see a single enemy in his line of sight. Could it be that he was just being paranoid? Just as he was hesitating, the corner of his eye suddenly sensed that something was wrong above him. The enemy was up there. Unfortunately, there was no time for him to change anything. A vampire bat that was gliding in front of him suddenly rolled down, its thin and furry body transforming into a young man with blood-red eyes and sharp claws in less than half a finger's time. The young man, who quickly turned around, knocked the demon hunter knight off his demon colt, and the two began to fight and bite each other in midair. Before they could land, more blood-sucking bats swooped down and quickly turned into vampires, ignoring the demon hunter knight's struggle and pouncing on him. Chapter 179. The red sun had already emerged from the horizon in the distant sky, but the light in the dense forest was still dim. Just as the demon hunter knights were galloping through the lush forest, swarms of vampire bats appeared from behind. They pounced on the demon hunter knights one after another. Vampire bats had leathery wings that allowed them to fly silently, and they could quickly switch between human and bat demon forms. Therefore, when a vampire bat flapped its wings above the trees and swooped down abruptly, almost no demon hunter could defend against its sudden attack. Of course, the demon hunter knights who were part of this team were not weaklings. Even if they were caught off guard, they could still retaliate and severely injure the vampire bat. Unfortunately, their bravery before they died was useless against the vampire tribe. They only needed to suck a few mouthfuls of fresh blood, and even the most serious injuries could be healed in a matter of seconds. Hence, relying on this method of pouncing, entangling, pouncing, entangling, pouncing, entangling again, the vampires took turns to attack and managed to quietly take out 7 demon hunter knights, until a shrill cry rang in the forest. Even though they were galloping on their horses, almost half of the demon hunters heard the scream coming from behind them. Turning around, they were horrified to see a group of strange demons that they had never seen before knocking one of their companions off his demonic colt and drowning him. With a loud roar, one of the knights reined in his warhorse. The magic colt soared into the sky and turned around in midair. Using its thick hind hooves, it turned around and used the tree as leverage to turn around and pounce back to the knights. At his command, the 20 or so demon hunter knights turned around and pounced back. However, their movements were not as smooth as this demon hunter knight's, and they were left behind by 20 to 30 steps. Before the demon hunter knight arrived, the arrow arrived first. With a loud clang, a flaming arrow nailed a human-shaped vampire to the tree behind him. The arrow that was as long as an arm had sunk into the vampire's heart and pinned him to the tree. Only a short section of the arrow could be seen above his chest. If the heart was pierced through, a human would have died a long time ago. However, the vampire in front of him acted as if nothing had happened and continued to struggle frantically. Ignoring the burning elemental flames on the crossbow, the vampire grabbed the end of the crossbow with his sharp claws and tried to pull it out. Unfortunately, it didn't budge at all. Without a choice, the vampire used his hands and feet to support himself against the tree trunk and pulled his body out from the end of the crossbow. This action undoubtedly caused the wound on his chest to become even bigger, leaving behind a terrifying penetrating wound that penetrated his chest from the front to the back. However, the vampire did not care and pounced on the struggling demon hunter knight. When he got up from the knight's body, the horrifying wound on his chest had disappeared, and the exposed skin was still as white and tender as ever. Monsters! This is a group of monsters, the magic-breaking knight roared. He threw away the rune bow that wasn't very useful and drew his rune sword. When his palm brushed across the cold blade, a layer of crimson, magical flame quickly turned the sword into a terrifying torch. As he roared, his demonic colt suddenly sped up and pierced through the group of vampires that were flying in the sky. A dozen of crisscrossing flames slowly dissipated in the air, and the vampires that had just left the demon hunter's body were instantly torn apart, exploding into blood, flesh, and bone fragments that splattered all over the place. After all, these were relatively low-level vampires. They were not as smart and powerful as the original vampires. Even their regenerative abilities were a few levels lower. Therefore, under the double attack of the magic-breaking knight's terrifying night combat skills and the flaming longsword, they could only end up with nothing left. The success of the magic-breaking knight immediately motivated the other demon hunter knights. They activated the rune swords in their hands and began to charge at the remaining vampires. Is this the terrifying power of this plane of knights? Suppressing his mysticism abilities and changing them to limitlessly strengthen his physical combat prowess and special combat techniques. Mary pondered silently as she slowly opened her blood-red eyes. After the magic-breaking knight succeeded in his attack, he turned around and cheered for his companions. Just as he patted his demonic colt and was about to charge again, his muscles suddenly tightened and his entire body tensed up. The demonic colt seemed to have connected with him. Under his command, it slowly turned around. The magic-breaking knight's eyes were like lightning. His cold gaze landed on the lush canopy of a distant tree. 100 meters away, on the crown of the tall tree, the layers of branches and leaves covered the enemy's body tightly, but it could not cover the terrifying scarlet eyes. When his gaze met the enemy's blood-red eyes, a thick, murderous aura began to fill the air. This was a terrifying evil being that was on par with him. Could it be that today's operation was a trap that they had arranged beforehand? No. I must inform Knight, who is leading the team, as soon as possible. Looking at the scene in front of him, the magic-breaking knight immediately had all sorts of bad guesses in his mind. But as his attention was diverted, the blood-red eyes suddenly disappeared. Not good. The magic-breaking knight suddenly raised his left hand, and the small shield embedded in his arm activated an oval energy shield that completely covered his front. As soon as the energy shield was formed, a violent external force erupted from it. 5 to 6 terrifying claw marks appeared on the translucent surface of the shield. The magic-breaking knight snorted as he used the energy shield to push away the slender figure that was crouching on it. Then, he fired a flame blade with his right hand. Ordinary demon hunters could only rely on rune weapons to perform both physical and elemental attacks at close range, and rune bows for long-range attacks. However, magic-breaking knights could rely on special attack techniques to attach elemental energy to invisible energy to form semi-long-range night combat techniques. The attack range of these night combat techniques was not large. Most of them were between 5 to 10 meters. Once the attack went beyond this range, the elemental energy attached to it would naturally be annihilated due to the dissipation of the energy, and the power of the attack would be greatly reduced. However, within 10 meters of the magic-breaking knight, this kind of elemental energy that could escape from the restraints of weapons and spread freely could cause unimaginable damage to his enemies. The terrifying defense-breaking ability of the special energy, coupled with the elemental damage, made the simple and crude elemental shield of an ordinary evil person unable to withstand this double attack. Therefore, the ability to condense this special energy was the key to a demon hunter's advancement to a magic-breaking knight. Of course, this was a top secret among the demon hunters. But today, Mary was going to use her own body to personally experience the horrors of a night combat technique. The flame blade was like a flaming scimitar that cut through the sky. It chased after Mary's retreating body, making it impossible for her to escape. A vicious smile appeared on Mary's pretty face. Instead of retreating, she charged forward and used her sharp claws to draw 7 to 8 visible bloody marks in front of her. In the next second, the flame blade and the bloody marks collided, and immediately a small firestorm erupted. Countless fragments of flame blades mixed in the violent flame shockwaves splashed in all directions, making whooshing sounds like bullets hitting each other. An ordinary elemental shield was not enough to withstand such a dense and violent attack. Just as the magic-breaking knight's left shield and right sword stared at the scene of fire without blinking, a fierce gust of wind came from above his head. The magic-breaking knight looked up in shock and saw Bloody Mary pouncing on him. The fragments of the flame blade that exploded at close range had caused some damage to Mary. Most of the fragments of the flame blade were blocked by the crimson armor that shot out from her body. The crimson rose twirled and destroyed countless attacks. However, some of the fragments still managed to penetrate the crimson armor and left scratches on the edges of Mary's body and limbs. Some of the small fragments were still embedded in Mary's body, and the small flames that were burning persistently. However, even with such injuries, Mary did not lose any of her courage. She did not retreat to deal with her injuries, but instead chose to sneak up on top of her opponent's head and launch another attack. The surprise attack did not allow the magic-breaking knight to condense the energy in his body. He could only use his legs to clamp down on his demonic colt and urged it to leap forward. He fell back on the horse's back, and a shield on his left hand once again blocked Mary's claws. Sharp claws scratched against the translucent surface of a shield, creating a sharp, ear-piercing noise. The fierce impact wasn't completely negated. The shield was pressed down, and the back of the magic breaker knight collided heavily with the back of the magic foal. The demonic colt let out a long neigh in pain as it sprinted forward. Mary, who was bounced back by the huge impact, spread her bat wings and immediately pounced on the magic-breaking knight from behind, defying the laws of physics. In her hand, a crimson longbow suddenly appeared, and a mysterious blood arrow with glowing red patterns condensed on the half-drawn bowstring. "Go!" With a shout, hundreds of crimson arrows instantly filled up the gap between Mary and the magic-breaking knight. Damn it, what kind of attack is this? The magic-breaking knight, who had never experienced such a close-range attack, was shocked. He turned around and slashed out with a fierce cross, instantly destroying most of the crimson arrows. The energy shield on his left hand blocked left and right, and he barely managed to block some of the arrows that slipped through. Even so, some of the blood arrows that penetrated the knight's battle technique and energy shield still left him and his demonic colt covered in wounds. If it wasn't for the runic armor on his body and the scales on his demonic steed's body, he would have sustained serious injuries from the previous round of attacks. The magic breaker knight roared, turned his horse around, and charged at Mary, who was chasing after him. Chapter 180. In terms of strength, the vampiric sorcerer and the magic breaker knight were not on par. It was hard to tell who was better. However, when the two of them fought each other for real, the difference between the two races was instantly revealed. One of them was a terrifying blood breed that could be found in all the high magic planes, while the other was just an ordinary human who had enhanced his physical strength and mastered some special elemental crystal techniques. Perhaps with their skillful battle techniques and powerful knight battle techniques, the mage breaker knight could be evenly matched with Mary. Both of them would have their wins and losses. However, when the battle entered a critical moment of life and death, Mary's superior physique and blood-sucking regeneration became the most powerful bargaining chip to turn the tide of the battle. After 3 rounds of battle, Mary had already gained the upper hand on the battlefield and was slipping toward a complete suppression step by step. With Mary's current nature as a vampire sorcerer, she did not need to suck blood from close range to obtain the blood-sucking regeneration ability. Instead, she only needed to deal a certain amount of damage to her enemy, and she would be able to absorb a steady stream of blood energy from her enemy's splatter blood. A terrifying opponent who grew stronger the more she fought, and her strength did not decrease with the damage inflicted on her body. It was the Magic Breaker Knight's worst nightmare. No matter how much damage he could inflict on Mary, as long as Mary could inflict the same amount of damage on him, he would never be able to defeat her. For a moment, the Magic Breaker Knight thought he was fighting against himself. No, he was fighting against his own blood. Every terrifying knight battle technique slashed out from the opponent's body, not the opponent's blood, but their own. His opponent only needed to exchange injury for injury, and it would be enough for him to remain undefeated in this battle. On the other hand, the Magic Breaker Knight continued to weaken. Not far away from the battlefield, the angry roars of the demon hunters could be heard. They must have encountered the same problem as him. If it was any other time, he would have broken through the enemy's blockade and regrouped with his companions to fight against the powerful enemy together. Unfortunately, he could not do that today. The demon in front of him was obviously the leader of the terrifying creatures, and her combat strength far exceeded theirs. If she was lured to her companions, perhaps no one would be able to escape from her ghost-like speed and her strange, flickering figure. The Magic Breaker Knight was still trying his best to hold on until his companions came to his rescue. If most of the 30 demon hunters were left behind, their companions would definitely find out and search for them. As long as he could regroup with one or two of his companions who were also Magic Breaker Knights, it would not be a problem to defeat this terrifying blood demon. As expected, the sound of a galloping demon colt could be heard from the distant forest. The pale-faced knight, who was already exhausted, regained his vigor and became energetic once more. Unfortunately, just as he was waving his flaming sword with all his might, activating 2 flaming blades to repel the terrifying demon, she did not retreat. Instead, she moved forward. She removed the protection of her blood-red armor, allowing the 2 flaming blades to pass through her body and explode into brilliant fireworks behind her. While the Magic Breaker Knight was wielding his fiery sword, there were still gaps between the pieces of armor, which meant that he could not defend himself from Mary's biting attacks and merciless claws. The Magic Breaker Knight was wearing a full set of armor, but there were still gaps between the pieces of armor, which meant that he could not defend himself against Mary's biting attacks and merciless claws. Therefore, under the gaze of the demon hunters, the Magic Breaker Knight, who was regarded as a great warrior in their hearts, was thrown off the horse like a deflated water bag. The demon colt let out a long neigh and fell to the ground in pain. There was a large hole in the back of its head, and blood was gushing out of it. The terrifying creature that was covered in blood had a curvaceous body, but in the eyes of the others, it was no less than a human-shaped demon in the skin of a beautiful woman. Mary spread her wide bat wings and stood in the air, her body drenched in blood. She was using her flexible tongue to catch the blood that was slowly dripping from her hand. Behind her, more than a dozen demon hunter knights were thrown off their demonic colts by the flying vampires. They screamed at the top of their lungs. As for the other demon hunters, all that was left of them were dried corpses lying in the forest. The demon colts that had lost their masters galloped madly in fear, and soon disappeared into the dreary morning mist. Nyinti, who led the team back, let out a furious roar that shocked the entire battlefield. He waved his rune sword that was as thick as a pillar of fire and spurred his horse forward. Mary grinned maliciously, turned around, and flapped her leathery bat wings as she flew into the treetops. The blood thralls that had just had a full meal followed her, yelling loudly. With the vampire's ghost-like flying speed, the demon hunters would be dreaming if they thought they could catch up to them in the forest. After chasing away the vampires, Nyini rode his horse slowly through the horrifying forest battlefield. The horrifying appearance of every corpse was so ghastly, but he forced himself to look through them one by one. Nyinti dismounted in front of the shriveled corpse of the Magic Breaker Knight and knelt before it. He silently recited the knight's motto that every demon hunter followed in their hearts. One after another, knights dismounted from their horses and began to collect the corpses of their fallen comrades. The entire forest was filled with a thick sense of sorrow. It's a type of evil that we've never seen before. It should be the group of people that the higher-ups wanted us to find. Knight Edward, who was naturally calm and steady, slowly rode his horse to Nyinti's side and asked in a low voice, "What should we do next? Why did they suddenly attack us?" Nyinti slowly stood up and asked softly. Knight Edward could not help but be stunned. "We're sworn enemies. Shouldn't they come out to attack us?" "No." Nyinti raised his head, his light brown eyes flashing with the light of wisdom. "Judging from their cooperation in luring the enemy and ambushing us, they're also highly intelligent creatures. So far, only 2 of them have shown themselves, but we have 15 Magic Breaker Knights. Even with such a huge disparity in numbers, they still dared to show themselves and set up a trap, just for revenge? You're saying, since they showed themselves, they must have a reason. If I'm not wrong, their nest is nearby. That's why they had to think of a way to lure us away. Nianti and Edward looked at each other and instantly understood each other's intentions. Without another word, they turned around and collected the corpses of their comrades with sincerity. On a hill far away, Grim sat cross-legged on the highest point. His mental power had already extended to the battlefield 30 miles away. Although he did not personally participate in the battle, the 30 wind breath monsters were scattered across the battlefield that spanned more than 10 miles, observing every movement of both sides. Mary led many blood thralls and vampire spawns in a surprise attack, killing 1 magic breaker knight and 23 demon hunters. It was a perfect plan. Unfortunately, Nianti was decisive enough to give up on pursuing Intich, turning around and dispersing the group of vampires, saving the last 11 demon hunters. This small flaw might not be a big deal. As long as Intich and Mary were given enough time and a large enough battlefield, they would have no problem nibbling away this team of demon hunters bit by bit. Even if 15, oh no, 14 magic breaker knights would not be able to interfere with this process. Wizards who had many strange tricks up their sleeves had more than just a small advantage when facing these magic breaker knights who only had powerful close-range attacks. It was a complete one-sided suppression. If they were to take turns fighting in the arena, Mary alone would be enough to wipe out this team of 14 magic breaker knights. However, if they were to swarm her, Mary would be able to take on 2 of them head-on, but it would be difficult for her to take on 3. If there were more of them, it would be Mary's turn to run away. As for Intich, his strength was almost on par with Mary, and his limit was 3 magic breaker knights. As for Grim, if he could coordinate well with the Lord of the Flames, he would be able to take on 5 magic breaker knights. However, it was unknown if the Lord of the Flames would be able to retract it. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, the 3 of them had an obvious advantage in terms of combat power when the enemies gathered together. They had only killed 1 magic breaker knight in the battle just now. This efficiency was too slow. However, just as Grim was lost in thought, the demon hunters in the distance suddenly made a new move. They actually split into 12 squads of knights, maintaining a distance of less than 30 meters from each other as they slowly fanned out toward the sorcerer's camp. This time, it was Grim's turn to curse. Left with no choice, Grim could only summon Intich and Mary back to his side. What's wrong? Why aren't we continuing? Mary had just consumed the blood of a magic breaker knight and was in a state of agitation. She was obviously dissatisfied with the plan to lure the enemy away halfway. Intich, who had been standing by the side, did not approach the 2. His green eyes were hidden in the shadows of his hood as he silently waited for Grim's reply. I'm afraid it's useless now. Grim smiled helplessly. The enemy's leader is also a discerning person. Their actions are so decisive. It seems that they have seen through our intentions. I'm afraid that we can only fight them head-on. Mary was obviously doubtful about this. Under her silent command, a small group of vampires attempted to attack the outermost group of demon hunters from the flank. However, they were shocked to find that the group of demon hunters was led by 2 magic breaker knights. While this small group of demon hunters were busy dealing with the vampires, other demon hunter squads quickly came to support them. Under the double attack of rune bows and rune swords, the group of 12 vampires were wiped out before they could even kill a single demon hunter knight. The demonic worm Intich did not believe it either. He sent out a scorpion clone to lure the enemy, but it was destroyed by a terrifying volley of fire arrows from the demon hunters. However, the direction of the demon hunter's search did not change. At this point, the 2 were completely convinced and finally agreed to Grim's request to fight head-on. Chapter 181. In the end, the battlefield was chosen to be a slightly flatter valley. Of course, this was not the ideal location for a decisive battle, but it was the best place Grim could find between the Demon Hunter Knights and the Sorcerer's camp. Since the Demon Hunter Knights had been harassed by the vampires and the mutated worms, They moved at the speed of a tortoise in order to prevent their formation from being too loose. But even so, the moment the sun rose to the middle of the sky, they still appeared on the designated battlefield. This was a sparsely forested area with slightly flat terrain. On both sides were undulating hills and streams, broken mountain ranges, and steep cliffs that could be seen everywhere. Thus, if one wanted to travel north, this was the best place for a large group to move about. However, at this moment, this place had turned into a despairing land of danger. A terrifying lava volcano blocked the path of the Demon Hunter Knights. This was a man-made lava volcano. Although it was not as powerful as the volcanoes found in nature, it still had the terrifying effect of turning the tide of a battle in such a small-scale battlefield. Two tall, flaming figures stood side by side at one end of the valley. Their tall and stalwart bodies were completely pieced together by black and red lava and flint. The intense heat was accompanied by a glaring red glow as it shot out from its body, roasting the lava stones on its surface in a semi-molten lava. Their thick legs were inserted into the lava pool, and the area within 100 meters was filled with dark red lava that flowed slowly. The green grass and tall ancient trees around the lava pool were also ignited by the terrifyingly high temperature. They were roasted, withered, turned yellow, cracked, and then ignited into little sparks with the lava pool as the center. The entire valley had become a scorched land. The ashes on the grass and trees at the edge of the battlefield were enough to cover a person's ankles. Although he was forced to fight a tough battle with the Demon Hunter Knights, Grimm still had to choose a terrain that was advantageous to him. Not to mention, the steep terrain on both sides was not conducive for the Demon Hunters to launch a terrifying siege on him. If the Demon Hunters dared to gather around the lava pool, Grimm would not mind using his terrifying spells to show them how terrifying an elemental sorcerer was on the battlefield. The strange battlefield and the treacherous enemies made the Demon Hunters, who were witnessing such a scene for the first time, at a loss as to what to do. Although this was not the first time they had fought with evil, every time in the past, the evil had always been hiding. They would only turn around and launch a mad, dog-like counterattack after being chased until they were at the end of their rope. But now, the evil one had appeared on the battlefield in the form of a powerhouse, looking like he was going to kill them all in one fell swoop. This was a completely new kind of battle experience. However, even though it was fresh, the death traps laid out by the enemy were truly terrifying. Every Demon Hunter Knight's heart felt heavy as they looked at the expanding pool of lava and the charred, withered trees that had been burnt to a crisp. If they wanted to charge at such an enemy, wouldn't they have to ride their demon colts into the pool of lava and trudge for hundreds of meters in order to get close to the enemy? It would only take 5 seconds for their demon colts to gallop 100 meters, but could they even run on the soft, flowing lava? In order to pave a path to the enemy's bones, how many companions would have to sacrifice their lives for it to happen? Countless questions floated in everyone's mind, causing every move of the Demon Hunter Knights that were slowly entering the valley to be filled with a sense of tragedy. The 14 Magic Breaker Knights slowly stopped in front of the battlefield, perched on their demon colts, and sized up the terrifying battlefield that the enemy had chosen. This was a new enemy, including the 2 enemies who had appeared earlier. It meant that there were 3 evildoers who had revealed their true colors so far. Nine walked out of the crowd and slowly took 2 steps forward. He coldly sized up the tall figure standing in the middle of the boiling lava pool. Of the 2 tall figures, one was an evil one, and the other was an evil puppet that he had summoned. One had to admit that compared to the 2 evil and treacherous ones, this evil one before him was much more admirable and frightening. Even before the battle began, this fellow had successfully used the special battlefield he had created to severely suppress the Demon Hunter Knights' morale. Even if all the Demon Hunters were fearless and even willing to sacrifice themselves, the sorrowful atmosphere clearly replaced the passion required to fight with all their might when they thought that they were about to become the stepping stones for others to charge at their enemies. The Demon Hunter Knights no longer had impassioned battle cries echoing in their hearts, but a solemn and stirring aria of sacrificing themselves for their companions. When the warriors stepped onto the battlefield, they did not think about how to fight with vigor or how to forge glorious victories through hot-blooded battles. Instead, they thought about how to sacrifice themselves. This was not exactly high morale, was it? Clap, clap, clap. Ninth extended his hands, using his metal gloves to applaud the enemy's treacherous and unpredictable psychological tactics. The clanging sound of metal clashing carried the scent of steel and arrogance, driving away the idle thoughts in the Demon Hunter Knights' minds. All the Demon Hunter Knights looked up, their gazes fixed on the great leader who had led them from one victory to another. The sorrow in their eyes gradually faded, replaced by the cruelty and steel of noble knights. Even if they were fated to die today, they would die proudly with the nobility and dignity of the Demon Hunter Knights. After all, the one leading them was the pride of all Demon Hunter Knights, Ninth the Mage Knight. Seeing that he had inspired his companions' morale, Ninth ordered with a deep voice, "Alva, lead the first team to the left and defend. Anthony, lead the second team to the right. Beware of the ambushes from the two evil ones who have yet to show themselves. Focus on defense. Do not pursue the enemy recklessly." Yes, the two mage knights bowed and accepted the order. "Benson, lead the third and fourth teams to cut down trees and fill the path. Be quick." "Yes, I'll go now." A burly mage knight with a rough face responded loudly. He jumped off his demonic colt and led a group of Demon Hunter Knights towards the nearest forest. "Edward, when the opportunity to attack appears, you, Daniel, and Joseph will lead your own teams to hold the line. I will charge with the rest of the Mage Knights and kill this overconfident evil one in one go." "No, Ninth, let me lead the charge. The Knights need you to stay at the back in command. It's better if I lead the charge." Edward's eyes widened as he argued without hesitation. The rest of the Mage Knights also volunteered to lead the charge. "No, I must lead the charge." Nine raised his hand to stop them. "Once the battle starts, there's no need for too many commands. The enemy's tactics are obvious. This evil one wants to confuse us and force us to take a detour or split up. That's the only way to create an opportunity for the two evil ones to ambush us. That's why the guy in front of us is their leader and also their shield. What we need to do is to use the most ferocious attacks to pierce through their shield and render their blocking tactics ineffective. At that time, the two evil ones hiding in the dark will lose their effectiveness and will be forced to join the battle to salvage the situation. That's when you can launch a ferocious attack and surround them. So, I beg of you, leave the heavy responsibility of leading the charge to me." After listening to Ninth's explanation, the group exchanged glances and nodded in agreement. To break the shield with a spear, the Demon Hunter Knights would need to bring out their sharpest team. In the entire Demon Hunter Knights, Ninth was the most ferocious among the Mage Knights. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the leader of this group at such a young age. Under Ninth's orders, the Demon Hunter Knights, who were blocked in front of the lava pool, immediately became orderly again. The Demon Hunter Knights who were guarding the lava pool were in charge of cutting down trees to fill the path. More Demon Hunter Knights patrolled the battlefield, guarding against the tall man in the sea of flames. Meanwhile, Ninth and the other 9 magic-breaking knights gathered in front of the lava pool. They held their breaths and gathered their strength, ready to launch a suicidal charge. However, their strategy was only a one-sided plan, and the unpredictability of the battlefield was far beyond their expectations. With Grimm's powerful strength, there was no way he would allow them to destroy the battlefield he had painstakingly built. When the Demon Hunter Knights took off their heavy armor and dragged heavy trees and large rocks to the edge of the lava pool, Grimm and the Lord of the Flames raised their hands at the same time and cast a joint fire spell, Meteor Shower. Under their command, a huge cloud of fire suddenly formed above the valley. Then, meteors with thick black tails fell from the sky. Their target was the Demon Hunter Knights, whose defense had been greatly reduced. "Defend! Everyone defend!" A mage knight with a loud voice yelled. Then, more Demon Hunter Knights rushed to the front and pulled their rune bows to the fullest, shooting out flame arrows to intercept the meteors. Most of the meteors were turned into fireworks by the flame arrows before they even hit the ground, although the shattered flames formed a sea of fire that covered a larger area. The terrifying impact of the meteors was reduced to nothingness. Chapter 182. Once the battle began, with Grimm's habit of planning before taking action, there was no way he would stop at this. Grimm, who had long transformed into a terrifying Balrog, clenched the flame scepter in his left hand and loudly chanted an obscure spell. As the spell that was infused with powerful magic rang out, the edge of the lava pool began to boil. Terrifying fire spirits, lava monsters, and lava hounds bathed in thick lava stood up from the pool and roared as they charged towards the shore. The demon-hunting knights were already prepared for the enemy's counterattack. More than 30 fully armored demon-hunting knights rode their magic colts and roared as they charged towards the fiery creatures at the edge of the pool. Just as everyone was fighting fiercely, a towering humanoid figure once again stood up from the center of the pool. It was the Fire Djinn. As a summoned creature, it was not as delicate as the magic colts. As soon as it appeared, it took heavy steps and swept up the sea of flames to the shore. Under the pressure of the terrifying heat waves and scorching flames, the demon-hunting knights were forced to retreat continuously to avoid the flames that were everywhere. Under the leadership of the Fire Djinn, the fiery creatures that were at a disadvantage immediately surged in momentum and launched a new charge at the enemy. With their help, the sea of lava that was originally only 100 meters in circumference began to move forward continuously, as if it was going to turn the entire valley into a new lava volcano. However, the retreat of the demon-hunting knights was only a bait. When the fiery creatures, especially the 10-meter-tall Fire Djinn, left the pool of lava, the magic-breaking knights, led by 9, immediately launched the fiercest and most violent attack. The magic-breaking knights raised their small shields and used their energy shields to block the dense rain of flames. Then, they endured the violent impact of the flames and used their rune swords to slash at the huge body of the Fire Djinn. The magic-breaking knights had previously changed the magical or on the rune swords. This time, the swords of the magic-breaking knights no longer emitted blazing flames, but the power of ice that was enshrouded in crystal-clear frost. Using ice to counter fire, it was obvious that the magic-breaking knights had special experience and battle techniques in fighting against spellcasters. The powerful knight combat skill hit the Fire Djinn's body with a bone-chilling power of ice. While tearing its body apart, its subsequent movements became stiff and sluggish due to the freezing of its body. A Fire Djinn with wizard-level power couldn't even withstand a round of attacks from the spell-breaking knights before it collapsed with a mournful cry. The remains of the fire-attributed giant fire spirit were filled with large and small pieces of ice. Even the terrifying flames were frozen inside by the light blue ice crystals. A huge ice crystal the size of a carriage was tossed into the pool of flames by Niente, landing right in front of Grimm. What was sealed in the ice crystal was the huge head of the giant fire spirit, and the terrifying roar it made before it died was also sealed in it. Was this a low-level provocation? Although such a trick would not work on a sorcerer who was known for his wisdom, the Demon Hunter Knight Commander's kindness was still worth doing. Grimm roared loudly. His huge flame demon body stepped on the boiling magma as he strode forward. Niente was overjoyed to see this. He put away his rune swords and changed to shooting ice arrows at Grimm. He silently retreated as if he wanted to lure Grimm out of the pool of lava. The roar of the Lord of the Flames grew even louder, causing the earth to rumble. Terrifying area of effect fire spells covered the sky as they flew towards the Demon Hunter Knights. It had no intention of avoiding the fire-attributed creatures when it cast its spells. Instead, it threw its most violent spells at the forefront of the battle. The Lord of the Flames attacks were mainly area of effect spells, while Grimm's attacks were focused on single-target spells. Terrifying flame spears that were as thick as a man's waist whizzed towards the enemies. Every now and then, he would point his finger lightly, and a terrifying pillar of lava would shoot up into the sky from below a certain target. Two demon hunter knights who were closer to the edge of the pool of lava were blasted into the air by the pillar of lava and were then killed by the flame spears. Their flesh and blood were burnt to a crisp by the rain of fire before they could even land on the ground. The death of their comrade infuriated the demon hunters. Frost bolts filled with hatred rained down on Grimm, but they were all blocked by the 3 lava shields that were revolving around Grimm's body. Compared to the flame shield, the lava shield was not only more resistant to fire, but it also had better physical resistance. Hence, it was not afraid of this level of damage from the rain of arrows. After advancing for a distance, Grimm stopped less than 15 meters away from the edge of the pool of lava. He laughed loudly as he attacked the demon hunter knights with terrifying single-target spells. Long-range spells were not as effective against the magic breaker knights as they were against the demon hunter knights. These magic breaker knights had mastered semi-long-range combat techniques and could easily destroy the incoming fire spells. Therefore, after a few ineffective attacks, Grimm focused his attention on the weaker demon hunter knights. After Grimm killed a few of his companions, Nianti could no longer hold back his anger. Since he could not lure this evil person to the shore, he would dive into the sea of lava to attack him. Under Nine's silent command, the demon hunters released a series of frost bolts. Not only that, but the frost bolts didn't lock onto Grimm. Instead, they landed on the magma in front and behind him. A small ice arrow exploded, and the ice energy was swallowed by the boiling lava before it could condense into a crystal-clear ice flower. But no matter how hot the lava was, it could not withstand the continuous explosions of the ice arrows. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the magma pool around Grimm solidified. A layer of light blue ice crystals formed on the surface of the magma, blocking all the high temperature and terrifying underground fire beneath it. Such ice crystals could not last long, but they did not need to. The magic breaker knights roared as they charged forward under Nianti's lead, targeting Grimm, who was trapped in the middle of the ice crystals. They're finally here. Nianti wanted to lure Grimm to the shore, but Grimm also wanted to lure the demon hunter knights into the pool of lava. Both sides were scheming against each other, but they understood each other's intentions. One side had a plan within a plan, while the other side played along. As for who was tricked and who had the upper hand, it all depended on one's strength. Seeing the demon hunter knights charging forward, Grimm would be bragging if he said he was not nervous. After all, he was about to fight to the death against 9 demon hunter knights of the same rank as him. Moreover, he had not fought these demon hunter knights many times, so he could not fully understand and analyze their battle tactics. Therefore, Grimm was taking a certain amount of risk by using his body to lure the enemy. Ever since he stepped onto the path of a magus, Grimm had been hiding behind the scenes in most of his battles. It was always the magic puppets he had created that charged into the fray. Although this effectively reduced the risks he faced, it also prevented his individual combat skills from being honed. Although the demon hunter knights in front of him could pose a certain threat to him, they could not be considered as mortal enemies. If he did not take this opportunity to train himself, he would have to use his blood to make up for the weakness in his battle strength if he met a powerful enemy that his magic puppets could not handle. Even though he knew that he could escape his current predicament with a flame teleportation, Grimm did not hesitate to stay and fight. Grimm roared loudly, and a terrifying stream of flames shot out from his 3-meter-tall body. Under his control, the pool of lava shook violently, and the speed at which the ice crystals melted suddenly increased. Some of the weaker parts of the ice crystals suddenly exploded, and hot air gushed out from within. If a magic colt passed by at this moment, it would definitely be scalded to the point where its flesh was lacerated, and it would be sent flying tens of meters into the air. In an instant, The huge ice crystals that had condensed into a block exploded into small islands and ice fragments that were barely big enough to stand on top of the pool of lava. Terrifying pillars of air rose and fell, instantly turning the pool of lava into a battlefield filled with traps. Even though he knew that this could be a killing field created by the evil, Ninth still charged forward without any hesitation from atop his demonic colt. The nimble magic colt leaped over the broken ice crystals as if it was flying, and it only took a few steps to get close to Grim. Hence, one side was the leader of the three powerhouses, and the other was the leader of the Demon Hunter Knights. The two of them had their first intimate contact with each other. The rune sword that was shrouded in dense frost energy slashed heavily at the lava shield that had moved in front of Grim. The powerful physical impact immediately left a fist-sized hole in the lava shield, and the surging frost energy surged in, freezing a large chunk of the terrifying flames on Grim's chest. Grim didn't back down either. Borrowing the time it took to tilt his body slightly, a terrifying flaming hand whizzed out and struck the magic colt that Nine was riding on. The magic colt instantly turned into a burning fireball and flew away. Chapter 183. The battle in front of him resembled an arcade game from his past life. However, he was the one playing the role of the villain. The lava shield was 2 meters tall, 1 meter wide, and half a meter thick. It was made up of countless flaming lava stones. Scarlet lava was still flowing out of the cracks on the shield. The knights leapt into the air and swung the rune swords in their hands with all their might. Colorful battle techniques struck the lava shield with ear-piercing whistles, shattering it and splashing lava everywhere. Since there weren't many ice shards around Grim's flame demon form, all the knights just dashed past him, trying their best to land their most powerful attacks on him. Grim, on the other hand, had turned into a huge and clumsy lava giant. He used the lava shield to block the enemy's attacks. His hands were covered in terrifying flames, and his 5-meter-long flaming whip was condensed from pure elemental flames. He used fire spells with terrifying elemental fluctuations to hit every fly that appeared in front of him. Some of the knights relied on their nimble bodies to dodge Grim's terrifying attacks. However, there were always some who couldn't dodge fast enough. Faced with the flaming whip, they could only tighten their bodies and use their energy shield to block the attack. The knights had an average of 14 points of physical strength. When faced with Grim's 20 points of strength after transforming into a flame demon, they would turn into angry birds and be sent flying. However, the biggest problem for the knights was not Grim's clumsy physical attacks, but the flame barrier that was everywhere. Ever since he had advanced to become a fire wizard, he had completed the first steps of elemental conversion. Now that he had a body of fire, Grim had successfully mastered the flame barrier. It was a domain-type fire elemental spell. When Grim raised the flame barrier with a roar, a light red elemental barrier enveloped an area of 100 meters around him. Within this area, everything began to burn. The earth was burning, the plants were burning, and even the sky was burning. Anyone who broke into Grim's flame barrier would suffer a terrifying 13 degrees of fire damage per second. This level of energy was equivalent to the offensive spells he cast when he was a beginner apprentice. There was a pool of lava below him, Grim's terrifying attacks above him, and his body was constantly suffering from fire damage. Only the knights who had basic elemental resistance could withstand such a harsh combat environment. If it were the demon hunters, Grim wouldn't even need to attack. Just the elemental damage from the flame barrier alone would be enough to burn most of the enemies to death. In the hundreds of years of purging evildoers, the spell-breaking knights had fought countless wizard-level spellcasters. However, in terms of difficulty in combat and spell casting, even 10 evil beings combined would not be able to compare to this terrifying fireman. The magic-breaking knights rode on their magic colts and flew across the ice shards. From time to time, they would attack Grim's lava shield with all their might. In the blink of an eye, 2 of the 3 lava shields had been destroyed, and the remaining one was already riddled with scars and wouldn't last much longer. 2 of the 9 magic-breaking knights were also hit by Grimm's melee attacks. They screamed in pain as they flew out of the lava pool, while their demonic colts tumbled into the lava. The pool of lava below Grimm was dark red and did not look eye-catching, but it was filled with terrifying lava that was half-melted. As soon as the magic colts fell into the lava, their skin and flesh began to emit thick black smoke. The sizzling sound of their skin and flesh being burned was unbearable. The magic colts did not even have the time to raise their necks and neigh before they were swallowed by the rolling lava. Only a few bubbles were left on the surface of the viscous dark red liquid. There were many demon hunters on the shore who endured the burning of the flame barrier and desperately shot frost arrows into the lava pool. They were trying their best to create floating ice crystals for the knights to stand on. After 3 or 4 rounds of arrows, they quickly retreated out of the range of the light red barrier. However, in just a short period of time, their exposed skin was already covered with bloody blisters, and a single touch would cause a heart-wrenching pain. If they were in such a state, even though they were on the periphery, the knights around Grimm were suffering 10 times more from the flame barrier. The 2 knights who were knocked out of the battle were indeed brave. They switched to the magic colts of the demon hunters and charged into the lava pool again. Since the beginning of the battle, Grimm had only suffered some insignificant physical damage due to the protection of his layers of flame elemental defensive spells. Now that most of his defensive spells were about to be destroyed, he finally retreated and was ready to switch places with the Lord of the Flames. This was actually the most common scene in a battle between a spellcaster and a melee combatant. With the protection of defensive spells, the spellcaster could inflict extreme elemental damage to the opponent without suffering any damage. However, once their defenses were broken, the spellcaster would be instantly killed by the opponent's lightning-fast attacks if they were to engage in close combat. Therefore, as soon as he saw that the situation wasn't good, Grimm sent out 2 terrifying flame shockwaves in a row to drive away the magic-breaking knights around him. He then began to retreat with large strides, try to move to the center of the lava pool. At this moment, Knight, who had been preparing for a long time, would not allow him to escape. He once again rode on his magic colt, trampling on the floating ice crystals as he charged towards Grimm. Grimm laughed coldly and waved the flame scepter in his left hand. 3 to 4 pillars of lava rose from the lava pool and intersected to block Nine's path. Knight, on the other hand, seemed to have given up on any path of retreat. Not only was he not forced to retreat, but he also leaped up on his magic colt and leaped over the pillars of lava that shot into the sky. He could leap over, but the magic colt couldn't. Thus, accompanied by an extremely shrill and wild neigh, the demonic colt charged head-on into the lava pillar. Its entire body was instantly drenched in the corrosive lava that cut through its skin and corroded its bones. The cries of the magic colt came to an abrupt end. Scattered bits of skin, and bones tumbled into the pool of lava. In the blink of an eye, even the last trace of its existence disappeared. Grimm did not have the time to pay attention to the tragic death of a magic colt. His attention was completely attracted by the figure leaping over him. What? This knight wants to fight me one-on-one. A hero challenging a great demon king? Grimm stopped retreating. His empty right hand instantly turned into a terrifying hand that was wreathed in black smoke and steaming flames, grabbing towards Knight. Knight could naturally resist the damage from the flame barrier with his own magic resistance. However, the terrifying flames coming from Grimm's body had a temperature of more than 3,000 degrees, which was equivalent to 110 degrees of fire elemental damage. Not to mention a person. Even an iron pillar would be melted into a puddle of hot wax in less than 5 seconds if it was grabbed by Grimm's flaming hand. However, before the flaming hand could close, a dazzling azure ice blade shot out and struck Grimm's broad chest that had lost its elemental protection. Grimm raised his head and let out a painful roar that shook the entire forest. Knight, I want your life. After activating Evil Vanquishing Slash at such a close distance, Knight should have fallen into the lava pool by now. However, He had come prepared and threw out a strange metal claw that stabbed into Grimm's arm. Using the claw as leverage, Nine leapt into the air once more. Grimm roared loudly and fiercely pounded his chest with both hands. The surging flames in his fiery demon body spewed out a terrifyingly hot stream of flames through the cracks on the surface of his body. This kind of indiscriminate full-range attack was the most terrifying. Magic Breaker Knights were adept at fighting attacks with attacks, using their strength to break through the opponent's single-target elemental attacks. However, facing this unreasonable full-range attack, Nine could only curl up behind the 1-meter energy shield with a pale expression and endure the wave of flames. At this moment, no matter how rich Nine's battle experience was, he could only brace himself and endure the enemy's attack first. A muffled sound rang out. Nine was like a small boat tossed up and down in a raging storm as he was pushed far away by the violent shock waves and terrifying flames. The metal claw that maintained the connection between him and Grimm didn't even last 2 seconds before turning into a puddle of crimson molten iron and being blown to some unknown corner. After flying for more than 20 meters, Nine was about to fall to the edge of the lava pool. However, a Magic Breaker Knight rushed over on his horse and caught him while brushing against the surface of the lava pool. He smoothly brought him back to the camp. Grimm stood in the middle of the lava pool and raised his left hand to look at the huge hole. A heart-wrenching pain surged up his heart. Although the Balrog's elemental body was mostly filled with lava and magma, it was still filled with Grimm's willpower that had transformed into fire energy. At this moment, the fire energy was an extension of Grimm's willpower, and the place the fire energy extended to was Grimm's body. That was why, even though Nine's large hand and chest were filled with crimson lava, it was still his willpower that was everywhere that suffered the pain. Grimm plunged his left hand into the lava pool and took it out after a while. His heavily injured left hand was already fine. He then took out a large amount of molten lava and smeared it on his chest, instantly healing the wound there. Chapter 184. How terrifying would 2 flame giants be when they fought with all their might? The Demon Hunter Knights could tell you this from personal experience. Grimm, who had transformed into a Balrog, and the Lord of the Flames had arrived at the edge of the lava pool despite the hail of frost bolts. The fire spells had instantly turned the place where the demon hunters were hiding into a sea of fire. Earth demon mantises and rock python mantises began to appear in the battlefield. Every time they appeared, they would grab a demon hunter knight that could not dodge in time and throw him into the lava pool. Grimm and Lord of the Flames took care of the rest of the job. Using this method, Grimm had already killed 4 demon hunter knights in a row. In order to lure the spell destroyer knights over, Grimm even risked his life by bringing Lord of the Flames out of the lava pool and onto the muddy shore. However, no matter how hard the muddy shore was, it would turn into a lava pool after being stepped on by 2 flame giants. Therefore, when the Balrog strode onto the shore, he left a dark red path of lava behind him. This was a rare opportunity. Even though he knew that it was a trap, Nine could not help but lead the spell destroyer knights to surround the flame giants. Nine was forced to fight a tough battle with Grimm, and Grimm did not seem to have much of a choice. Once the battle became one-sided, the spell destroyer knights, who could not see any hope of winning, would most likely give up on the battle. If a complete team of demon hunter knights were to retreat from the battlefield, the evil worms in Titch and Bloody Mary, who were in charge of flanking them, might not be able to complete their mission. When the time came, if the information here was leaked, it would attract even more terrifying opponents. Therefore, from the beginning of the battle, Grimm had made up his mind to annihilate this team of demon hunter knights here. For this reason, he did not hesitate to stand on the front lines of the battle to attract the spell destroyer knights and create the best opportunity to annihilate this team of demon hunter knights later on. Therefore, the battle became white-hot from the start. The 11 spell destroyer knights formed a small combat team, surrounding Grimm and the Lord of the Flames as they continuously clashed with each other. Grimm and the Flame Lord were knocked back and forth by the impact. The defensive spells they cast on their bodies were soon reduced to ashes. Their bodies were also covered with wounds. But even so, the two of them displayed extraordinary strength and even executed an ingenious combination of attacks to instantly kill a magic-breaking knight who couldn't dodge in time. Grimm's party had also lost 2 high-level rock pythons and 1 quasi-magus-level rock python. When Grimm could no longer endure the continuous barrage of attacks, he once again summoned a fire djinn with his flame scepter. Therefore, the 3 flame giants stood side by side, surrounded by 2 quasi-magus-level rock boas and over 10 earth devil puppets. Grimm finally relied on his small team of devil puppets to create a defensive line that could be used for both offense and defense. The rock python and the earth demon centipede were mainly in charge of defense, blocking the continuous and barbaric charge of the magic-breaking knights. The 3 fire giants were in charge of casting fire spells, trying their best to turn everything in the surroundings into a sea of fire. At this point in the battle, the magic-breaking knights finally realized the huge difference between the evil in front of them and the ones in the past. In the past, there were many powerful evildoers, but as long as the demon hunters were willing to sacrifice themselves to break the tough shell of their opponents, they could kill them with a single strike. However, this evil in front of them had great strength, a strong physique, and unparalleled elemental attack abilities that other evildoers could not hope to achieve. Even if there was a shortcoming in speed, it was still covered by the flames he created. It was extremely difficult to attack by exploiting the opponent's weaknesses. If there weren't so many devil puppets willing to die for them, if there weren't the powerful Flame Lord, the powerful magic-breaking knights would only need 3 to 4 people to withstand Grimm's attacks and quickly take him down. But now, as the lava pool continued to expand, there were fewer and fewer places for them to stand, and the damage they could inflict on the evil was getting smaller and smaller. At this point in the battle, Nine had no choice but to make a painful choice. He had to admit that he had lost this battle and lead the remaining troops out of this heartbreaking battlefield as soon as possible. Or he could hold on for a little longer and wait for the opportunity to win. As long as they could successfully kill the flame giant and win the main battle, the other 2 evildoers hiding in the dark wouldn't be a threat anymore. It was precisely because the enemies kept appearing and disappearing from time to time that the entire team of magic-breaking knights was trapped in the lava battlefield. After sacrificing so much, it would be worse than death for the magic-breaking knights who valued honor more than their lives if they were to retreat in defeat without any results. Grimm had made use of the unwillingness and conflict of his enemies to drag the battle to the latter half of the battlefield. However, when the second magic-breaking knight was killed by Grimm, the Flame Lord, and the Flame Spirit, Nine finally made up his mind. As the deep, drawn-out horns sounded, the demon hunters began to retreat from the battlefield, ready to end this hopeless, torturous battle. In order to allow the demon hunters to retreat more easily, the team of magic-breaking knights maintained their powerful attacks on Grimm's team. Waves of powerful battle techniques slashed the earth golems into pieces. It was a pity that Nine didn't realize the difference in strategy between him and his enemies due to the gap in their knowledge. The team of magic-breaking knights that he led had locked onto the enemy leader, Grimm, and Grimm had also placed all his hopes on the magic-breaking knights. So what if there were more demon hunters? Even if Grimm was alone, he was confident that he could annihilate all of them in the vast mountains. The only thing that he had to be wary of was the magic-breaking knights. Therefore, even if he had to risk letting all the demon hunters escape, he was determined to kill all of them today. When the enemy's retreat horns sounded, the demon hunters quickly retreated from the bottom of the valley, leaving a 200-meter gap between the demon hunters and the team of magic-breaking knights. Thus, Grimm, who had transformed into a flame demon, roared at the sky. Today's real attack had begun. The first to make a sacrifice was, of course, the fire djinn. It swayed its 10-meter-tall body and dove into the middle of the magic-breaking knight squad. Then, it self-destructed with an earth-shattering force. The sudden attack instantly destroyed the order that the team of magic-breaking knights had established. Since the start of the battle, the 12 magic-breaking knights have been roaming the battlefield with their skillful riding and terrifying battle techniques. They kept charging and roaming, using their dazzling maneuvers to attract the enemy's attention. Then, when the opportunity presented itself, they would launch a continuous charge. Oftentimes, when a mage breaker knight brushed past his target and sent out a bewitching slash, the second mage breaker knight was already charging forward with a cross-burst slash, and the third mage breaker knight was already charging forward, ready to charge at any time. Just by relying on such continuous attacks and skillful maneuvers, no matter how powerful the enemy was, they would be smashed to pieces and killed on the spot. But now, with the terrifying self-destruction of the fire djinn, a man-made lava volcano immediately appeared in the field. The terrifyingly high temperature, the terrifying flow of flames, the monstrous flames, and the flowing molten lava. All of this completely disrupted the Knight Squad's attack rhythm, so everyone could only desperately escape from the place where the volcano was raging. They could no longer care about the formation and rhythm. This was exactly what Grimm wanted. This kind of hellish environment was unbearable for humans, but for the Flame Demon and the Lord of the Flames, it was like a fish in water. They laughed maniacally and disappeared on the spot. When they reappeared, they were beside a magic-breaking knight who had separated from his companions. Two bursts of flames suddenly burst out, scaring the magic colt under the mage breaker knight into retreating. But before it could react, Grimm and the Lord of the Flames appeared in the flames. Flame leap. As soon as they appeared, the two tall burning men pushed out with their palms, and a violent fire spell engulfed the body of the mage breaker knight. Flame storm. Scarlet flame pillar. Ignite. Chain fireballs. Grimm, who had been holding back, no longer had any scruples and used the power of his fire spells to their fullest. Under the pincer attack of him and the Lord of the Flames, how could the mage breaker knight, who only had ordinary elemental resistance, withstand such a bombardment of fire spells? The mage breaker knight's sturdy body was instantly torn apart by the crazy spells. The mage breaker knight and his magic colt exploded into flesh and blood, flying in all directions. But before they could fly out of the explosion, they were blown into ashes by the terrifying flames and violent shockwaves. Edward, 9, cried out in pain, but he could not save his companion's life. In the Knight Squad, Edward was his most capable assistant, and an excellent mage breaker knight whose strength was second only to him. But no matter how angry he was, what could he do? Under the pincer attack of two powerful magi, the mage breaker knight, without any special life-saving methods, was no better than a pile of rotten meat. Retreat, retreat, retreat. 9 gritted his teeth and finally gave up on the idea of fighting Grimm to the death. Instead, he yelled at his companion who had been blown away by the explosion. Unfortunately, there was no way Grimm would let them escape in this situation. Boom, boom, boom. Grimm's Flame Demon and the Lord of the Flames teleported to their path of retreat, firmly blocking the path between the Mage Breaker Knight Squad and the Demon Hunter Squad. Chapter 185. If the previous battle was just a relatively fierce battle against demons, then the current battle had completely turned into a bloody battle of life and death. The Inferno Djinn's self-destruction created another terrifying crater in the middle of the valley. The viscous magma in the lava pool in the distance was spreading towards them at a speed visible to the naked eye. Streaks of terrifyingly hot flames were injected into the lava pool bit by bit, igniting everything along the way. In less than a quarter of an hour, the entire valley would be covered in boiling magma, turning this place into an even larger lava pool. Therefore, with a strong enemy blocking their way in front and a sea of fire behind them, the only way for the remaining 11 magic-breaking knights to escape was to break through Grimm's blockade. This was also the only way for them to survive. Strange, squeaking noises suddenly came from the forest around the valley. A large swarm of vampire bats swarmed out of their nests, and pounced on the group of demon hunters who were trying to turn back to save their leaders. In the forest where the demon hunters were hiding, the earth rumbled and the ground cracked. Countless terrifying scorpions surged out of the ground, instantly throwing their formation into disarray. Grimm sent out all his subordinates to hold back the demon hunters, while their masters, Bloody Mary and the demonic worm in Titch, transformed into a bloody shadow and a ball of black smoke, dashing out of the forest. They passed by Grimm and the Lord of the Flames, who were standing side by side, and headed straight for the disorganized formation of the magic-breaking knights. Grimm whistled and summoned the lightning giant and 2 quasi-magi-level rock pythons, telling them to block the entrance of the valley for him. Meanwhile, he and the Lord of Flame disappeared into the elemental flame, laughing viciously. Now that the formation of the magic-breaking knights had been disrupted, it was time for them to take advantage of the situation and start a massacre. Even Mary and Intitch couldn't help but want to make the first move. How could Grimm, who had been busy for so long, be willing to fall behind? Although they were powerful sorcerers who came from another world, and their physique and equipment were far superior to the magic-breaking knights who claimed to be at the same level as them, it was easy to defeat them, but it was difficult to massacre them on a large scale. In a one-on-one fight, Mary and Intitch had a 70 to 80% chance of winning. But if they had to face 2 enemies at the same time, their chances of winning were only 40 to 50%. Now that Grimm had the Lord of the Flames, it was like he had a sorcerer's clone by his side at all times. As long as he found an opportunity, he could teleport to the enemies and have the 2 fire elemental experts bombard him with spells. The magic-breaking knights who could withstand a round of attacks from them had not even been born yet. Under Grimm's command, the earth golems began to harass the magic-breaking knights with no regard for their own lives. They didn't need to fight head-on either. All they needed to do was dive into the soil and immobilize the devil cult's movements. In an instant, 18 earth puppets, 3 advanced rock pythons, Grimm's group, and the Flame Lord rushed into the field. Such a chaotic scene might be a disaster for the magic-breaking knights who were known as the kings of the land, but for the wizards who possessed strange abilities, it was the perfect place to fight. Mary had bat wings, and her speed in narrow spaces was several times faster than the magic-breaking knight. In such a dangerous environment, she sometimes dashed through the crowd and used her blood-red longbow to shoot at the magic-breaker knights. Sometimes she would approach the enemies and use her sharp claws to fight them in a close-range, bloody melee. Many against few, fast against slow, Mary had almost used her speed advantage to the extreme. On the other hand, the demonic worm in Titch was still as mysterious and evil as ever. He transformed into a cloud of black smoke, gathering and dispersing at the enemy's side. Sometimes he would suddenly condense into a human form, and then he would open his mouth and spit out flying insects that blotted out the sky and earth. Sometimes he would disintegrate into thousands of strange scorpions and directly overturn the enemy's body. Once he was attacked by an enemy, he would turn into black smoke and quickly escape to another place. Against such an enemy, it was impossible for the magic-breaking knights to inflict fatal damage with fire or ice. After fighting for so long, the magic-breaking knights did not even know whether the evil worm was a human or an insect, let alone find its fatal weakness. In the face of these powerful evil spellcasters from another world, the outstanding magic resistance and flexible rune weapons of the Magic Breaker Knights were so proud were no longer as sharp as before. Even if Bloody Mary was covered in cuts and bruises, as long as one of the magic-breaking knights was bleeding, the magic-breaking knight's injuries would automatically heal in just a few moves. No matter how many times the terrifying swarm of evil insects was scattered, when they flew to another place, the black-robed Intitch would stand up again. Fighting these unkillable cockroaches was simply torturous for the magic-breaking knights. If they were still full of energy and in a neat formation, they could rely on their advantage in numbers and continuous attacks to kill Mary and Intitch by accumulating damage. But now, with the rapid erosion of the lava pool, they could not even find a safe place to stand. Under such circumstances, not to mention surrounding the enemy, Even their own survival was a problem. If Bloody Mary and the demonic worm in tech had only brought them chaos and pain, then Grimm's entrance had brought them death without a doubt. Not to mention them, even the evil insect in Titch did not dare to let Grimm and the Lord of the Flames unleash a full round of spells. With Grimm's specialization in fire, the damage of the fire spells he unleashed was more than 140 degrees. With the simple and crude equipment of the knights in this world, it was still mainly used to defend against physical attacks. It was impossible to defend against spells of this level. Lava Core, Rapid Fireball, Flaming Storm, Scarlet Flaming Pillar, Doomsday Volcano, Magic Flaming Wall. These powerful fire spells were unleashed by Grimm and the Lord of the Flames one after another. Every magic-breaking knight that they targeted was blasted into smithereens, leaving nothing behind. Grimm killed another 4 magic-breaking knights in one go, while Mary only managed to take down 1. As for Titch, his results were about the same as Mary's. There was nothing that could be done. Fire spells were battlefield spells, and their destructive power was always at the top of the list. Although Mary was of the same rank as Grimm, she was still an agility assassin. Her ability and efficiency in direct combat on the battlefield could not be mentioned in the same breath. On the other hand, the evil insect in Titch was more like an evil wizard. His abilities were strange and varied, making it difficult to guard against him. But when it came to the ability to attack head-on, it was rather embarrassing and weak. But in order to prevent all the spoils of war from being snatched by Grimm, the two could only roar and charge forward without regard for their own safety. Each of them surrounded 2 magic-breaking knights and fought with their lives on the line. All that was left for Grimm was the lonely knight, compared to the handsome Niente at the start of the battle. The current Niente was like a lone wolf forced into a dead end by a hunter. The once beautiful knight's armor had been deformed by the terrifying heat and was covered in traces of fire and smoke. The hair, skin, and nails on his body had all fallen off, replaced by blisters and burn marks filled with blood. Every time he swung with force, the blisters on his body would burst and spurt out purplish black and smelly pus. At this moment, he was already drenched in blood. He had lost count of how many times he had switched to his magic colt, and it was now riddled with scars and exhausted. Seeing Grimm approach step by step, Niente suddenly laughed bitterly. He leapt down from his magic colt with difficulty and patted its back lightly. "Go, if you have the chance to escape, do it quickly." Perhaps understanding Niente's words, the magic colt raised its neck and neighed. It raised its head to look at the tall and mighty Grimm, and finally turned around and galloped away in fear. Without the burden of the night, it might really be able to find a way to escape from the steep rock walls on both sides before the magma arrived. Niant, who had chosen to stay behind, struggled to take off his armor that had turned scorching red. He gripped the rune sword tightly with his hand that had been burned to the point of lacerating his flesh. He calmly stared at Grimm, who was striding over, and adopted a stance that suggested he would die together with the enemy. Seeing Niente's provocative gaze, Grimm shook his head slightly and waved his hand. The Lord of the Flames strode towards his final enemy. Niente's eyes revealed a disappointed expression. This enemy was too cautious. Even when he had the absolute advantage, he did not let victory get to his head. He was actually willing to give up the sweetest fruit of victory in the entire battle. As the commander of such a grand battle, personally taking the head of the enemy's leader was a great honor that nothing else could compare to, and yet the enemy had given it up so easily. For the first time, Niente began to understand why he had suffered such a tragic defeat today. The enemy, everyone on the enemy's side, from the leader to the enslaved creatures, did not cherish the honor of a knight at all. From the start of the battle until now, Niente's stamina and spirit were on the verge of collapsing. Looking at the approaching flame giant, he suddenly fished out 2 glistening elemental crystals and stuffed them into his mouth, roaring as he charged towards the enemy. The 2 elemental crystals were red and blue respectively. It was obvious that they were a fire crystal and an ice crystal. The elemental crystals with different natures in addition to the last trace of essence blood that he had forced out would be able to heavily injure the enemy, even if he couldn't kill it. This was also the only way he could deal damage to the enemy. Seeing Niente roaring as he charged forward and the extremely chaotic elemental undulations in his body, Grimm smiled coldly without saying a word. Before the explosion could complete, the Lord of the Flames had already disappeared in a sea of flames that soared into the sky. The soil beneath Niente's feet split open as a rock python pounced out with its mouth wide open and swallowed him whole. Soon after, the rock python quickly sank into the soil. Moments later, a deep rumble sounded from the depths of the earth. The entire valley began to tremble soundlessly. Countless bottomless ravines appeared on the ground, and the forests near and far began to tremble. Chapter 186. The Demon Hunter Knights that had held on for so long were finally defeated. The core leadership was wiped out in one fell swoop, bringing them nothing but despair. Edward died in battle, Anthony died in battle, Alva died in battle, Joseph died in battle. The list of casualties was shocking, and now, with Niini's name, it was enough to destroy the confidence and will of the demon hunters to continue fighting. Although Daniel, Benson, and the other two magic-breaking knights were not dead and were still fighting the two evildoers, the demon hunter knights were still alive. But to save them, the demon hunter knights first had to get rid of the hateful vampires and evil insects, then charge through the densely packed elemental puppets at the entrance of the valley. After that, they still had to fight the terrifying firemen who came out of nowhere. The low and desolate retreat horn sounded once again. The demon hunter knights retreated, and even their companions who were entangled with them were no longer there. The demon hunter knights who used to be arrogant and full of metal were now like stray dogs who had lost their spirits. They ran away with their tails between their legs, their faces full of humiliation. The desolate forest was filled with their fleeing silhouettes and the sorrowful cries of their demon colts. However, before they could completely escape this terrifying battlefield that made them heartbroken, a terrifying howl suddenly came from the sky above the forest. Huge black shadows streaked across the treetops, announcing their arrival to the world with a horrifying neigh. The demon hunter knights, who were already frightened by the mere twang of a bowstring, had a bad feeling in their hearts. They whipped their demon colts with all their might and charged left and right in the forest, hoping to use their speed to get rid of the terrifying black shadows. Their will to fight and spirit had been shattered, and they did not even have the thought of stopping to test the enemy's strength. They only wanted to use their demon colt's speed to charge out of this land of nightmares as soon as possible. But not long after the ominous creature above them descended, a group of terrifying monsters that struck fear into their hearts suddenly appeared from the forest in front of them. Judging from their appearances, they seemed to cover all the powerful creatures that could be found in the Greenland forest. Although they were not the same species, they all had one thing in common, and that was a pair of dark green eyes. Grimm stood at the entrance of the valley, looking in the direction where the demon hunter knights fled. In the sky above the deep forest, he saw the wyvern knights circling in the air. The interior of the forest was covered by a sea of lush trees, and he could not see what was going on. But if the wyvern knights were mobilized, there must be other wizards as well. It seemed that even though Wizard Kogan had rejected Grimm's request for help, he still had his own arrangements in the dark. Seeing that Grimm and his men could not defeat all of the enemies in one go, he could only jump out from the shadows and join in. Eager to seize their spoils of war, Knight Kogan, and Knight Kogan also had a difficult time. No matter which battle circle Grimm tried to approach, he would be met with angry roars and stern rejection from the other party. It couldn't be helped. Any knight who was killed by Grimm and the Flame Lord's dual fire element spells would end up with nothing left of them. This was something that made Mary and Intitch extremely resentful. Otherwise, if they could take down the 14 magic-breaking paladins in one piece, it would be a huge improvement for them. Therefore, the remaining 4 magic-breaking knights on the battlefield had become their exclusive territory. Any outsider who tried to get close would be attacked by them. From this, it could be seen just how terrifying the two of them who had fallen into the thirst of their bloodline were. After looking around and making sure that his battle was over, Grim finally exited his Balrog form. When the crimson lava peeled off his body and the molten lava gradually cooled down, Grim let out a pained groan towards the sky. In today's battle, he had been at the forefront of the battle from beginning to end, so he had suffered the most attacks. The elemental demon mantis didn't have physical senses and wouldn't feel mentally exhausted, but he did. He could. When he transformed into a Balrog, most of the damage he suffered would be covered by the magma he absorbed, but the pain was still clearly left in his memory. After transforming into a Balrog, his vitality had been greatly improved. Therefore, the injuries on his body were covered by his powerful regenerative abilities, so he didn't feel any pain. But now that he exited the Balrog form, his vitality began to rapidly decline. The pain from the physical injuries he'd shielded from the battle gathered and assaulted his mind. Grim, who prided himself on being calm and strong, couldn't help but let out a painful groan. However, the battle didn't just bring him pain. Grim could vaguely feel that his spiritual force had greatly increased after advancing to become a magus. The source of this increase in strength clearly pointed to the laws of the plane. Although he was a magus from another plane, after analyzing part of the plane's laws, he was able to obtain the corresponding feedback from the plane's consciousness through bloody slaughter. It was a special feeling that was hard to describe, but it also felt like a strange energy that he had never deeply understood. It was this mysterious feedback that had greatly increased his spiritual force. As an invader from another dimension, he was definitely hated by the consciousness of the plane. However, in this mysterious world where the laws of the plane covered him, as long as his actions met the basic requirements of the laws of the plane, even the controller of the plane, the consciousness of the plane, would not be able to stop Grim from obtaining the rewards he deserved through the laws of the plane. It had to be said that when a hazy consciousness of a plane weaved a perfectly self-consistent plane world with the power of the entire plane, the layers of densely packed laws of the plane would also ensnare the plane itself within it. Grim was slaughtering its people, but it could only follow the laws of the plane and give Grim a corresponding reward. What a preposterous thing this is. However, in a material plane where the will of the plane had been born, this was something that couldn't be more natural. Hatred was still hatred. The hazy will of the plane might be able to push the world in a certain direction through those who could understand its will, but it couldn't overturn or change the laws of the plane it had weaved. Moreover, this was a small plane of knights, and the will of the plane itself was muddled. It wanted to form a clear and intuitive idea and then pass it on to its people, and such a difficult task was definitely not something it could do. Even the sorcerer world, which had matured and grown many times stronger, couldn't do it, let alone a small plane like this. That was why Grim and his people had openly invaded this plane of knights. But they didn't worry that it would tell the strongest of the plane in their dreams and come here to fight. It wasn't that it didn't want to, but it couldn't. The newborn will of a plane was like an immature baby in its womb. It might have instinctive reactions to things that were highly dangerous, but it didn't have the clear consciousness and intuitive reactions of an adult. That was why, although the strongest of the plane had grasped some of the laws of the plane and sensed the existence of the will of the plane, it was difficult for them to establish a stable and clear spiritual connection with it. They might be able to sense the restlessness and anger of the will of the plane, but it was difficult for them to understand the source and root of the matter. At this time, top-notch prophets were rare and precious. That was why top-notch prophets were the most valuable strategic assets in the various material planes, and they were highly sought after by large organizations. Unfortunately, due to the dedication of the demon hunters in this plane, it was difficult to find a prophet who could clearly see the future of the plane. Of course, this was also because Grim was ignorant and inexperienced. If not for the great rank 6 Magus making a move behind the scenes, their Magus camp would have long since been exposed to the strongest beings of this plane. That was why, Although the great grade 6 Magus sat cross-legged in the camp all day, his existence was of great significance to the sorcerer's outpost. It was difficult for Grimm to have a clear sense of all this. He was now completely immersed in his own spiritual world, silently looking at the statistics of his body that the AI chip had gathered. Grimm, Grade 1 Human Elemental Magus. Elemental Constitution, Fire Specialization. Strength, 1. 5. Agility, 0. 8. Vitality, 1. 4. Spiritual Force, 1. 3. It had only been half a month since he came to this plane, and his strength had increased by 0. 1. His vitality by 0. 2. And his spiritual force by 0. For such a terrifying growth was rare after he became a Magus. Even if he persisted in deep meditation every day, the increase in his spiritual force would only be 3 or 4 digits after the decimal point. If not for the help of the AI chip, he would have thought that he had stagnated. Without exceptional talent and a large amount of precious resources, most Magi could only rely on daily hardship to increase their spiritual force. It was no wonder that Anderson and Corgan were still grade 1 Magi even after advancing for hundreds of years. If they followed the normal route, they would have no hope of becoming grade 2 Magi. The main deciding factor was the slow growth of spiritual force. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm's efficiency in deep meditation was many times that of others. If even he found it hard to endure the tortoise-like growth of his spiritual force, others would have long since fallen into despair. At this moment, Grimm could empathize with Magus Anderson's feelings. If it wasn't for the daily torment that was driving him crazy, he wouldn't have been able to make such a resolute decision that left no room for negotiation. Chapter 187. After the victory, the wizard camp was extremely busy. The winged dragon knights flapped their huge wings and flew up and down in the center of the camp, sending back the demon hunters they had captured. As soon as they entered the camp, they were sent to Wizard Kogan's lab. What awaited them was the most terrifying nightmare they had ever experienced in their lives. Among the busy people, Grimm saw the figure of that indigenous young man again. He was now Wizard Kogan's right-hand man, helping him with some auxiliary work in modifying wizard beasts. Seeing Grimm had returned, Kogan, who was checking the ingredients one by one, let the young man do the work and strode towards Grimm. You did well this time. Even Mr. Sarubo mentioned your name just now. It seems like he has been paying attention to you. Kogan couldn't help but pat Grimm's shoulder and encourage him. It was obvious that Wizard Kogan respected Mr. Sarubo from the bottom of his heart. However, when he thought about how his every move in this wizard camp would be detected by Mr. Sarubo's huge and detailed will, Grimm couldn't help but have goosebumps all over his body. However, when Wizard Kogan took the initiative to approach him, Grimm could only try his best to give a kind response. He even chose to ignore the bloody handprint on his shoulder. How come that little guy is still alive? Asked Grimm curiously. The last time he gave this young man to Kogan, Grimm thought he would find a shadow in some wizard beast body the next time he came back. We are planning to establish ourselves here for a long time, so it is necessary to have a native puppet. His talent is not bad. As long as we modify him a little, he will become one of the most powerful people in this plane. By then, he will be much better than us doing everything ourselves. A sinister smile appeared on Kogan's cold face. How are the resources in this plane? How much profit can we get from them? From the analysis of the current data, the most valuable resources in this plane are the white star arum, fire dragon grass, emperor bloodgrass, sea spirit star, void stone, and propagation flower. There are void stone and propagation flower in this plane. Grimm had a look of disbelief on his face. Any material plane was basically developed from an inconspicuous half-plane, and every step forward would take tens or even hundreds of thousands of years. Therefore, during the long time it was growing and nurturing, it was very likely that the interior of the plane contained the void stones that drifted out from the depths of the galaxy. Void stones were one of the main materials used to construct long-distance teleportation spell formations. Even in the resource-rich sorcerers of the sorcerer world, this kind of thing was a top-notch strategic resource that the high-ranked sorcerers strived to control. It was difficult for ordinary sorcerer families to get their hands on it. As for the propagating flower, it was another interesting thing. It was a special kind of plant and also a special kind of magic medicine. Using the propagate flower as the main ingredient, alchemy wizards could concoct a mysterious potion that could allow powerful wizards to have normal offspring. In the history of magi, it was already extremely difficult for magi of rank 2 and above to have children. On one side were high-grade wizards, and on the other side were ordinary humans. The chances of them giving birth to normal offspring were extremely low. If both sides were high-grade wizards, the chances of success would be even worse. After all, sorcerers were a group of people who repeatedly advanced in rank, and the degree of their body transformation and mutation was comparable to that of magical beasts. Moreover, it was a chaotic and natural mutation. Therefore, although most high-grade wizards still maintained their human form, if one looked closely at the origin of their body, they would no longer have much of a relationship with humans. There were also many high-grade wizards who underwent even more thorough mutations, and it was possible that even the origin of their souls had changed beyond recognition. Therefore, the chances of such a high-grade wizard and a man getting together to give birth to a normal human baby was almost zero. To be honest, the chances of them giving birth to a magical beast was higher than the chances of giving birth to a human baby. Therefore, why did sorcerer families place so much importance on the continuation of the family bloodline, and even encourage those low-grade wizards to leave a bloodline for the family? This was the main reason. Once a talented magus appeared in the younger generation of those large families, he or she did not even have to go to the trouble of looking for one. The family would take the initiative to search for all kinds of beauties or some strange races of the opposite sex for their enjoyment. This was a kind of welfare, and also a method to continue the bloodline of the family. Because of this, any method or medicine that could assist in reproduction became the hottest and most precious resource among high-grade wizards. The propagation flower was such a magical plant. It could perfectly integrate the excellent life factors of both parents and give birth to a child with great talent as a sorcerer. As for whether this child was still in the category of a human, no one actually cared. Therefore, finding traces of the propagation flower in this inconspicuous night plane would undoubtedly bring great benefits to the Cerubo family. With the rise of the tide, the boat that had helped to open up a new plane would definitely receive great rewards from the family. These rewards might not be important to veteran sorcerers, but to a new sorcerer like Grimm who had just advanced and did not have any family background, it meant that he would not have to go out and search for resources for the next 100 years. Without the pressure of advancing to the next rank, Grimm would have at least 200 years of leisure time to slowly accumulate knowledge about magic and research his future direction. After chatting with Corgan for a while, Grimm returned to the row of stone houses and found a room to close the door and rest. In this battle in the valley, from the initial luring of the enemies to the mid-stage defensive counterattack, and finally to the final all-out counterattack, Grimm participated in the whole process and played the role of a cornerstone. Correspondingly, there was a huge amount of mental exhaustion and uncountable mental trauma. These losses could not be recovered by themselves, and could only be repaired by a long period of sleep. Anyway, after the group of Demon Hunter Knights was annihilated, there would be no more hidden threats around the wizard camp. At least it will be peaceful for a while. As for when the next group of enemies would appear, it was not something that Grimm could control. Therefore, after understanding this, Grimm let go of everything else. He summoned the lightning giant to protect himself and fell into a deep sleep on the stone bed. While he was sleeping, Mary also returned to the camp and brought back 2 shriveled corpses of the Magic Breaker Knights. Although there wasn't much value left in this kind of loot, Wizard Kogan was still very happy to accept it. After all, compared to Intik, Mary brought back something, but Intik did not even leave behind a dried corpse. However, there was a group of strange black beetles the size of a wash basin behind him. There were about 21 or 22 of them, and they seemed to be his latest harvest. Wizard Corgan was indeed an old wizard who had advanced for 200 to 300 years. Just by looking at the strange appearance of these black beetles, he was able to quickly determine that they were a group of carrion beetles. Although they were only infants, they still possessed frightening strength. Carrion beetles could be considered as a terrifying monster that lived in groups. They had a hard shell that was not inferior to an anatomy wizard. They could fly, drill into the ground, and attack with their sharp fangs and limbs. Mature carrion beetles also possessed outstanding magic resistance. Witchcraft attacks of less than 100 degrees would not be able to damage their bodies. All these advantages were enough to make the carrion beetles an enemy that even official wizards would not dare to provoke. The rank of the scorpions that Entik had raised with his flesh and mental power was too low. It was difficult for them to support him and was not suitable for a battle between wizards. However, the appearance of the carrion beetles meant that Entik had finally upgraded the evil swarm to a level that matched his wizard rank. Once these carrion beetles passed their infancy stage and began to mature, Entik would become a fearsome and influential figure among the rank 1 magi. Mary lingered outside the door of Grimm's resting place for a while before she gritted her teeth and left. An entire team of demon hunter knights had been annihilated here. If the news was not suppressed as soon as possible, the entire Dullen province would be in an uproar. That was why Mary was in a hurry to return to Blue Hill City and use her dark forces there to nip any potential trouble in the bud. Entik, who also had an important mission, did not stay long in the camp and went into the forest. He needed to set up insect traps at all the key junctions to prevent the news from leaking. Of the 2 villages and 1 small town at the edge of the Greenland forest, he only took down Cocker Village. If any hunters or adventurers from the remaining villages or towns broke into the battlefield and discovered something, all the cover-up would be meaningless. It just so happened that the batch of carrion beetle larvae that he had just hatched urgently needed a large amount of nourishment. Hence, Entik had decided to take down the remaining villages and towns after sneaking out of the camp. This way, not only could he block the source of any possible leaks, but he could also increase his own strength. Why not? This time, Grimm had spent 4 days sleeping. He did not want to wake up so early, but the strange energy fluctuations around him made it difficult for him to sleep. Hence, he had no choice but to wake up early. As soon as he opened his eyes, Grimm sensed a strong spatial fluctuation. This spatial fluctuation was so familiar and unforgettable that Grimm was able to determine its nature almost instantly. Interplanar teleportation. The last time they were brought from a Salubo family's demiplane, it was this kind of ultra-long distance interplanar teleportation. That teleportation had tormented Grimm half to death, and it was still fresh in his memory. However, as soon as he understood the nature of the spatial fluctuation, Grimm fell into deep confusion. According to Wizard Ko Jin's explanation, the second batch of reinforcements should only arrive in a month. But now, Grimm looked at the AI chip's prompt. It had only been 18 days, 11 hours, 33 minutes, and 31 seconds since they arrived in this plane of nights. Just as Grimm's doubt rose in his heart, it immediately turned into a sneer. As expected of a great rank 6 magus who played with people's hearts. Although he said it would take a month, the actual time needed was only 18 days. This way, even if Grimm and the others had bad intentions, or if they were caught by the natives of this plane, the information they leaked would be severely distorted and would not have much of an impact on the follow-up operation. Chapter 188. When Grimm removed the protection on the door and put away the lightning giant, he walked out of the stone room. Only then did he realize that the other wizards were also standing outside the door, gazing at the simple tower from afar. As for the expressions on their faces, there were many. Seeing Grimm come out, they all nodded in greeting and shifted their gazes back to the tower. At this moment, the ripples formed by the spatial fluctuations could be seen with the naked eye. Ripples spread out in all directions like ripples on water, touching the defensive spell circle on the outside. The two forces clashed, creating more and more ripples. Many places had already become densely packed with spatial fragments. Fortunately, the defensive spell circle had blocked the ripples from spreading out, preventing them from spreading outside the illusory barrier. Otherwise, with the intensity of the spatial fluctuations, the most powerful beings in the entire plane will be able to sense that something was wrong with this area. The spatial fluctuations became more and more intense. Finally, with the ear-piercing sound of leather being torn apart, the ripples of the spatial folds converged at a certain spot in the tower, and a teleportation door slowly opened up. No one in the camp had received any information about this teleportation, so they had no way of knowing the scale and level of the reinforcements. At this moment, everyone had lost interest in talking. They stood there silently, waiting for the final result. An hour after the teleportation door disappeared, the gate of the tower slowly opened. Groups of wizards walked out, led by Forgan. They were the rank 2 wizard Forgan and 23 wizards from the Salubo family. These family magi were obviously veteran magi who had been stationed in various large secondary planes for many years. Thus, the moment they came out, they didn't need any instructions to fly up on their own. After a simple look at the layout of the Magus camp, they began to attack. Forgan, on the other hand, walked towards Corgan and the others and began to ask about the situation around the camp. One by one, the mechanical beasts, wizard beasts, and rock puppets were released, and they began to clean up the buildings in the camp. The magi of these families all had bulging pockets. It was obvious that they had come prepared. Hence, their actions were swift and decisive, concise and decisive. As they spoke, a few buildings at the edge of the camp were knocked down one by one. The mechanical beasts waved their numerous metal tentacles and transported the broken bricks and rubble out of the camp, while the rock puppets rapidly leveled the ground. Looking at their posture, it was obvious that they were extremely dissatisfied with the original layout of the camp and wanted to tear everything down and rebuild it. More sorcerers gathered near the simple tower, pointing and gesticulating. They seemed to be discussing the construction of the new sorcerer tower. Corgan and the rest of the camp's elders stood respectfully beside Forgan, answering his every question seriously. When Forgan heard that there were 2 magi hiding outside the camp, and that they had successfully taken control of a few villages and a small human city, his stern face finally revealed a satisfied smile. While they were talking, a group of rock golems had arrived in front of Ko Jin's magic beast lab. Seeing that they were about to use their stone fists to push down the stone room without hesitation, the native youth screamed and ran out. He stood in front of the laboratory and waved his arms angrily. A wizard floating in the air casually waved his hand, and a large cluster of dark green, thorny, man-eating flowers sprang out from the ground and tightly bound the youth. Afterward, the wizard floated in front of the youth and pierced his skin with his black, sharp fingertip. He dipped his finger into the youth's blood and tasted it. Afterward, he nodded his head in satisfaction. In the next moment, the wizard began to carve a palm-sized soul wizard circle on the youth's forehead. It looked like he was going to extract all the memories from his soul. The corner of Wizard Kogan's mouth twitched a few times. He then lowered his head and explained to Wizard Forgan, "Master, this native boy has some talent in spell casting. I was planning to train him to be our eyes and ears, as well as our puppet. You see, no need." Mr. Forgan didn't seem to care about what his subordinates were doing. He's just a lowly native. We can make arrangements for this after the camp is stabilized. Now that we've extracted the memories from his soul, the new magi will be able to understand the situation of this world much faster, and their work efficiency will be greatly increased. This is very good for the development of the camp. Wizard Ko took a few deep breaths and didn't say anything else. In the time it took for him to say these few words, the soul wizard circle had been completed. As waves of white light converged in the wizard formation, the native youngster stood still. His entire soul consciousness was extracted by the wizard formation on his forehead, condensing into a dense white bead. The wizard placed the white bead between his eyebrows and closed his eyes. After a few moments of silence, he opened his eyes and nodded his head in satisfaction. Afterward, he threw the bead to the wizards beside him. Just like him, everyone used their power of the will to examine the memories of the young man's soul. Soon, they had a general understanding of this plane. There were even a few magi who were gifted in learning who could communicate in the native language of this plane. For wizards with extraordinary power of the will, looking through the memories of another soul was a piece of cake. Maybe the entire life of that native youth was only worth a few minutes in their eyes. In the end, the Wizard Beast Lab was destroyed, and the materials of the Wizard Beast were exposed to the light of day. A few interested wizards floated over and rummaged through the corpses, picking up the surviving demon hunters and a few withered corpses of the magic breakers. As for the other trash, they were cleared away along with the bricks and debris. "Master, what do you think we should do?" Kogon asked respectfully with the same smile on his face. "The wizard tower in the camp needs to be built as soon as possible. There's nothing for you to do here for now. Later, I'll send 2 wizards to take over the human town. You guys go with them and do your best to support them. Remember, don't let the original forces here disturb the camp. That's all I'm asking for." With that, Wizard Forgan turned around and left to gather his men. Stiff smiles hung on everyone's face. Everyone had lost the desire to talk and silently lowered their heads in contemplation. The atmosphere in the camp was depressing. When the night fell again, Grimm and his team of 7 arrived at Blue Hill City. 5 old wizards from the wizard camp and 2 newly appointed wizards. Everyone turned invisible and quietly floated in the night sky 300 meters above them, looking down at the brightly lit human city below them. After all, Blue Hill City was a famous scenic spot on the continent. It was also adjacent to the resource-rich Greenland forest. These geographical advantages combined made Blue Hill City a large number of rich and powerful people. They were either leaders of the Chamber of Commerce, nobles who came here purely for sightseeing, or artists who admired the reputation of this place. No matter which one it was, their arrival brought great vitality to the city and made the nightlife here colorful, obscene, and luxurious. They didn't have to wait for long. A small dark creature rose from the shadows of the waning lights. It flapped its leathery wings and quickly flew in front of them. "Masters, I'm here to welcome you under the Master's order. Sirs, please follow me." The vampire bat instantly transformed into a well-dressed nobleman and bowed respectfully to everyone. Unfortunately, before he could finish his sentence, the leading magus raised his left hand slightly, and a line of fire struck the magus' shoulder at lightning speed, causing him to scream in pain from the burns. "From now on, I am the master of this place," the wizard said coldly. "Take me to Wizard Mary." Everyone's eyes flickered. Obviously, they didn't expect Wizard Mary, who was sent by Mr. Forgan, to take control of the situation so blatantly before they even met Mary. Although Lord Forgan had told them to assist Wizard Mary, the fact that he had humiliated Mary in such a merciless manner was out of everyone's expectations. Wizard Kogan sneakily glanced at Grimm. Grimm, on the other hand, was still looking at the night view of the little city below him with a smile on his face. It seemed like he didn't notice what was happening around him. After all, the one who came to welcome them was just a vampire derivative. His status was even lower than the blood slaves that Mary had embraced. Therefore, facing the anger of a superior wizard, he didn't dare to argue or struggle. He just kept begging for mercy. After letting out a sigh of relief, Wizard Miri waved his hand and put out the ball of fire. The vampire derivative didn't dare to waste any more time. Enduring the pain, he turned into a vampire bat again and flew towards a corner of the little city. Everyone immediately followed him. The place where Mary met them was still the secret palace from last time. Along the way, there were young noble men and women who were dressed to the nines. They hugged each other and whispered to each other in the shadows of the garden, corridors, and corners. They were all very curious about this mysterious big shot who came without an invitation. Mary had used the embrace to recruit people with a bit of power or influence, but this group of vampires in front of them was made by her using other methods. As for the lower-level vampire derivatives, they didn't even have the right to step into this secret area. Under the gaze of the vampires, the wizards walked in one by one and stepped into the scary blood pool that Mary had meticulously created for herself. The luxurious bed was gone, and in its place was a mysterious blood pool that was 5 square meters wide. Mary was comfortably soaking in it, enjoying the service of the 4 beautiful vampire girls around her. One of them gently massaged her arms. One of them held a golden cup for her to drink, and 2 of them used toothpicks to pick peeled grapes and gently put them in her mouth. Chapter 189. The arrival of the crowd did not affect Mary's enjoyment of soaking in the blood pool. Wizard Kogan and the others were expressionless. The 2 wizards who were ordered to take over the place, Miri and Latu, looked gloomy. Their faces were so dark that ink could be squeezed out. Along the way, the 2 of them had already felt the resentment hidden in the hearts of the crowd. However, with their status as wizards of an old family, the 2 of them were full of disdain for the newcomers in front of them. Wizards who had not participated in the dimensional war were like chickens that had just learned how to walk in their eyes. So what if they were unwilling? Would these guys dare to openly defy the orders of the family? However, what they did not expect was that a little vampire who had just advanced for less than half a year actually came out and openly challenged their authority. The few experienced wizards did not come out to provoke him, but a little vampire who had just advanced for less than half a year actually appeared and publicly challenged their authority. "You must be the new wizard Mary. I think you should have received Forgan's message. From today onwards, Blue Hill City will be under the control of the 2 of us. You must immediately hand over the puppets and spies you control." The 2 wizards looked at each other, and the assistant wizard Latu came forward to negotiate with Mary. Mary lazily turned around in the blood pool. Her snow-white skin and the bright red blood mixed together, making her look even more strange and demonic. "Blue Hill City is here. Take it if you want it. I don't want to worry so much. However, some of the people here have become my blood slaves. Their existence is a part of my own strength. You don't have to pull out my claws and wings, do you?" At the end of her sentence, Mary snorted with a nasal voice and glanced at the 2 wizards with her scarlet eyes. "How dare you? Do you dare to disobey Forgan's order?" Although Wizard Latu had a gloomy personality, his face was flushed by Mary's contempt. "What order did I disobey? Forgan asked me to cooperate with you, and I did. As long as you don't touch my men, you can do whatever you want in Blue Hill City. I have no objections. Are you trying to say that the 2 of you together can't control this small city with only mortals? If that's the case, I really need to laugh a few times." "You?" Latu's gaze instantly sharpened. Before coming here, they had already obtained basic information about this small human city. Objectively speaking, Wizard Mary had done a good job. In such a short time, she had firmly controlled Blue Hill City. From the noble leaders who had real power in the city to the rogue leaders who had mastered the cat and mouse path, it could be said that most of the key positions in Blue Hill City had been replaced by Mary's people. In this case, Mary asked them to avoid her people and control Blue Hill City. How could they do that? Were they supposed to enslave those city guards or street thugs? Putting aside the fact that the gains did not make up for the losses, even if they really succeeded, wouldn't the puppets they controlled become Mary's subordinates? Faced with such open provocation, Latu was infuriated. Although he had not completely gotten rid of the suppression of the plains laws, he was still unwilling to endure the contempt of a vampire witch. Following his explosive shout, Latu's shriveled cheeks began to protrude forward, revealing a long, canine-like muzzle. Thick black hair grew out rapidly and covered his entire body in an instant. Fangs, claws, black hair, green eyes, these are the typical characteristics of the werewolves. This fully revealed the identity of this wizard Latu, a bloodline wizard. The only thing that was unknown now was which kind of demonic wolf bloodline he had chosen. However, before Latu could completely transform into a werewolf. A spring of blood from the blood pool splashed down. Then, a red blood shadow instantly cut into the blood spring and chased Latu inside like a ghost. The people in the house still remained calm, but they all put up energy shields to isolate the blood splashing everywhere. They had no intention of intervening in this dispute. As soon as the flames on Wizard Miri's body were ignited, he frowned and turned to look at Grim, who was looking at him with a smile on his face. Two clusters of golden flames burned silently in their eyes, silently colliding with each other and even stirring up sparks in the air. In that moment of hesitation, the blood spring once again fell back into the blood pool. Mary stood proudly above the blood water with her snow-white feet. The blood-red armor on her naked body only covered her abdomen, navel, left shoulder, and a few other parts of her body. Most of her fair skin was exposed to the air. On her right arm, there were 5 terrifying claw marks that were so deep that they could reach the bone. Black smoke lingered around them. It was obvious that Latu's wolf claws still had some special effects. However, compared to Mary's light injuries, Wizard Latu was covered in blood and almost turned into a blood man. Both of them were bloodline wizards, but Mary's vampire form was clearly known for its extraordinary agility, while Latu's werewolf form was known for its ferocity and sharpness. In such a narrow area, it was impossible for both sides to shed all pretenses of cordiality and fight each other. That was why Tula was clearly at a disadvantage if they fought with speed in this small space. In just a few short moments, Mary had already scratched dozens of bloody marks on Latu's werewolf body. Moreover, as blood gushed out from the werewolf's body, Mary's body also faintly flickered with red light. Under the impact and neutralization of the red light, the black smoke on the wound on his right arm had clearly faded a lot, and the edge of the wound also showed signs of healing. After transforming into a werewolf, Latu's intelligence had also clearly deteriorated. Stimulated by the numerous injuries on his body, terrifying bloody lines appeared in his dark green pupils. His fanged mouth slightly opened and spat out thick white gas. He lowered his body slightly and stomped on the ground with his black, hairy hind legs. His throat rolled as he let out a deep roar. A violent and ferocious battle intent quickly gathered on his body. A cruel smile appeared on Mary's pretty face. A pair of huge leather-like bat wings spread out with a swoosh. The blood pool beneath her was almost boiling. Streams of blood rose and fell one after another, and dense blood energy lingered around her body. From a distance, it looked like she was wrapped in a thick blood-colored cloak. The many blood thralls outside of the secret room screeched in anger. Their eyes instantly turned blood red, and they bared their fangs at the werewolf to threaten it. They completely blocked the door, and as soon as Mary gave the order, they would bravely rush in and fight to the death with the enemy. In the world of vampires, blood thralls completely obeyed the source of their bloodline. This kind of control was even more than most witchcraft contracts. Enough! All of you stop. Wizard Lay couldn't take it anymore. He roared in a low voice. Lord Forgan sent us here to solve the problem, not to let you guys cause trouble here. Anyone who dares to make a move will be looking down on my authority. As soon as he finished his last sentence, Milay's entire body burst into flames, turning him into a man of fire in an instant. The temperature in the secret chamber rose to nearly 1,000 degrees in an instant. Some of the exposed wooden materials immediately emitted black smoke, emitting crackling sounds. The few vampires near the door couldn't withstand the terrifying heat, and their bodies began to quickly dehydrate. Their fair and tender skin had now become wrinkled and withered. Not more than 3 fingers later, the front of their bodies had become charred black, and black ash had even begun to fall to the ground. Grim gently flicked his finger, and a red magic circle shot out, covering the secret room. The raging elemental flames in Wizard Lay's body suddenly stopped, and the terrifying heat could no longer spread outside of the red magic circle. Wizard Lay finally looked at Grim again. I didn't think you'd choose to specialize in fire. How rare. If there's a chance, I hope to have a good talk with you. As soon as he finished speaking, Millet turned back to glare at Tula, who was about to explode, and walked out of the secret room with his head held high. The vampires guarding the door scattered to the sides under Mary's signal. They bared their fangs in a threatening manner, but none of them dared to actually reach out their claws to an experienced wizard. Tula's werewolf form roared for a long time, and with great difficulty, he used his willpower to suppress the raging battle intent in his body. A wisp of black smoke flashed as Tula exited his werewolf form and returned to his human form. The werewolf's self-healing ability was indeed extraordinary. In less than 5 seconds, the wounds all over his body had completely disappeared. Tula's green eyes stared at Mary, then turned to look at Grimm, and silently walked out of the secret room. Since both sides had parted on bad terms, there was naturally no room to sit down and talk peacefully. The two angry wizards floated in the air, and soon they found a noble's manor 3 miles away from the city. They didn't bother to hide their identities anymore and directly entered the manor. In less than a quarter of an hour, they became the owners of the manor. The original owner of the manor had either become a corpse or a puppet controlled by someone else. Therefore, Millet and Tula settled down in the suburbs of Blue Hill City. After waiting for the two eyesores to disappear, Mary exited her battle state and gently landed on the edge of the blood pool. She glanced at Corgan and the others with a faint smile on her face. "What? You guys can't even straighten your necks. A group of men, but all of you are cowards. Don't think I'm stupid. None of you are going to stand up for me, but you brought those two guys here to be unreasonable. Are you going to use me as a weapon? Are you going to let me be the one to stand up for you? Let me tell you, if you don't compensate me for my losses today, don't expect me to be a fool in the future." Corgan, Keel, and the others all had evil smiles on their faces. For the first time, they felt that Mary's reckless personality was actually quite good. As wizards, the pursuit of fair and just transactions was the best way to ensure mutual relationships and interests. Their identities were awkward, and it was not suitable for them to face those two guys head-on. Therefore, it was reasonable for them to pay some compensation for Mary. Chapter 190. Hiduran City. It was the time of the day when the sun was the brightest. The huge square in front of the majestic city hall was already occupied by a sea of people. Groups of fully armed city guards with long halberds in their hands pushed with all their might to prevent the huge open space in the center of the square from being engulfed by the surging tide of people. It was early spring, but the breeze still carried a hint of coldness. Even so, the city guards responsible for maintaining order were so tired that their armors were crooked and their foreheads were covered in sweat. The people in the square, regardless of gender, all held a bouquet of beautiful flowers in their hands. They stood on their tiptoes and shielded their eyes with their hands as they desperately looked towards the horizon, as if waiting for something. There, under the blue sky, there was nothing noteworthy other than a few white clouds floating leisurely. On both sides of the city hall, teams of demon hunter knights in bright armor faced off against the Lord's guards on the other side. Even though both sides were not in a state of mutual hostility, the atmosphere was still solemn and somber compared to the square below. Every time the demon hunter knights on top of their magic colts glanced at the opposite side, there would be a hint of undetectable disdain in their eyes. But when their gazes moved to the distant sky, there would be a hint of excitement hidden within the anticipation. Compared to the normal city guards, the Lord's guards, under Grand Duke Ellington's command, could be said to be well-trained and valiant. But their warhorses were obviously not as good as the Demon Hunter Knights' magic colts. Be in terms of size or ferocity, it was too far apart. If the rune weapons were taken into account, the gap between the Lord's guards and the Demon Hunter Knights was so huge that it was almost impossible to make up for it. On the Night Continent, only those who swore loyalty to His Majesty the King and passed the Demon Hunter Knight test could obtain magic colts, rune weapons, and other standard equipment. These were tightly controlled by the Central Kingdom, and it was difficult for the outside world to obtain them on a large scale. That was why the Demon Hunter Knights became the most powerful knight equipment in the Night Continent. Because all the Demon Hunter Knights thought of themselves as knights under His Majesty the King, they did not acknowledge the leadership of the local nobles when they were stationed or carrying out missions. Therefore, every year, there would be countless disputes between the local nobles' armed forces and the demon hunters over jurisdiction. This also led to conflicts between the armed forces of the local nobles and the demon hunter knights, and it was normal for both sides to hate each other. As for the small hostility between the people below, it did not affect the upper echelons of both sides to shake hands and chat happily. In the spacious and bright city hall, the long table used for municipal meetings had been moved to one side of the hall. At this moment, it was filled with fragrant delicacies and drinks. Exquisite stir-fried foie gras, steak drizzled with sauce, perfectly grilled golden lamb. However, at this moment, no one paid attention to the delicacies of the banquet. Everyone was anxiously waiting for the big shots to appear. At the entrance of the hall, close to 100 people wearing the standard armor of the anti-magic knights were standing in 2 rows, looking around. Behind them, a dozen or so radiant knights were gathered together and discussing softly. According to the Sorcerer Continent's standard of strength, these radiant knights could be considered as frightening experts whose strength had reached grade 2. However, today, they were still not the main characters. They were just members of the crowd waiting anxiously. As the grade 2 profession of the demon hunters, the radiant knights were, of course, much stronger than the anti-magic knights. The anti-magic knights usually wore a full set of knight armor, which could cover most of their bodies under the hard armor. With the runic armor's magic resistance, the anti-magic knight's defense had reached an extremely shocking level. In the few evil wars that broke out in the Night Continent, the anti-magic knights often took the spells of the evil ones head-on, rushed to the side of the evil ones, and cut them down one by one. Therefore, one could imagine how high their defense was. Compared to the anti-magic knights, the surface area of the radiant knight's armor was greatly reduced. The exquisite armor was no longer the cumbersome full-body armor. Instead, it was a piece of armor that could be disassembled. It could only cover the chest, abdomen, crotch, shoulder, upper arm, and a few other vital parts. In order to maintain agility and speed in battle, the rest of the Radiant Knight's body was either covered by soft armor or simply exposed. If the anti-magic knights were said to be simple weapons and defensive equipment, then the Radiant Knights had reached the stage of using the runic energy to strengthen their physical strength. The few parts of the armor on the Radiant Knights were engraved with mysterious patterns of unknown effects. Whenever they encountered an enemy, they only needed to activate these runes to absorb power from the runic energy, and from there, become a powerful rune knight. The reason why they were called Radiant Knights was because once the runic energy was channeled into their body, their entire body would emit a faint glow like a magic weapon. At that moment, they were already equivalent to a humanoid magic weapon. A berserk magic sword also needed armor? No. At that time, they only needed to attack, and attack again. The anxious crowd waited from sunrise until now, but no one slacked off or was dissatisfied. Even the usually calm Grand Duke Ellington was pacing back and forth in the city hall, stopping from time to look at the distant sky. Evidently, the main character of today's welcome banquet was someone important enough that even a Grand Duke like him could only silently endure the torment of waiting. Finally, as the crowd waited anxiously, a clear alarm rang from the sentry tower on the distant city wall. The crowd could not help but perk up, using their palms to shield their eyes from the sun as they looked towards the west. It's here. It's really here. Today was a beautiful day with clear skies, but at the end of the horizon, 2 indiscernible black dots had unknowingly appeared out of nowhere. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the 2 black dots grew larger and larger. In the distance, a resonant dragon roar faintly sounded out like rolling thunder, causing everyone who heard it to feel dizzy and their minds to tremble. But before they could slowly understand the origin of this inexplicable palpitation, the 2 black dots had already arrived in the sky above Haduran's city, displaying their imposing and majestic bodies in front of everyone. These were two terrifying green dragons that were more than 20 meters long. If the spindle-shaped long tail that was covered in bone spikes were added to the two dragons' tails, the two green dragons' tails would probably reach an astonishing 30 meters long. They had jaws full of sharp fangs like a crocodile's, towering and distinct facial bones, and layers of emerald green dragon scales that perfectly covered every part of their bodies. The terrifying dragon claws below them were thick and powerful, the sharp ends flickering with a chilling light. Green dragons in ordinary material planes only had one pair of wings, but the green dragons in this plane of nights had two pairs of wings. This undoubtedly gave them a terrifying flying speed. When the green dragon's huge body hovered above the square, its huge olive-colored eyes looked down at the densely packed human heads below it. It couldn't help but raise its neck again and let out a loud dragon roar that shook the heavens and the earth. Waves of dragons might pour down. The crowd in the square immediately became restless. Many timid women and children let out mournful screams, and the crowd became somewhat chaotic. The green dragon seemed to have a special interest in creating chaos. A strange light shone in the depths of its eyes. It was obviously quite satisfied with its masterpiece. Jefferson, who was riding on the green dragon's back, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As one of the only 3 dragon knights in the Night Continent, Jefferson had once ridden the green dragon Isendra to visit countless human cities. Every time it saw a dense crowd, this hateful green dragon that had just reached adulthood would play this trick. From this point of view, it was not without reason that many ancient books classified green dragons as evil dragons. Jefferson stretched out his hand and patted the green dragon's long neck, then made a hand gesture to Kalek, who was on the other green dragon. The 2 green dragons swooped down at the same time, flapping their wide wings and landing in the middle of the square in the air. When the giant dragons landed, their fleshy wings flapped in the air, stirring up a strong wind comparable to a small storm. The closer crowd was blown away, the flowers in their hands and the gauze hats on their heads, as if they had grown wings, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The crowd had waited for so long just to see the majestic figure of the giant dragon. Now that they suddenly saw the terrifying figure lying on the square like a mountain of flesh, they were so scared that they held their breath, not even daring to breathe loudly. The knights who had been waiting in the city hall, along with the nobles of Hadurun City, came out in a single file, welcoming the arrival of the 2 great dragon knights with warm applause and passionate gazes. The scene was very lively for a while. However, just as the 2 sides shook hands and chatted happily, a few cloaked people hidden in the crowd at the entrance of the long alley in the distance were also watching everything that happened in the square with passionate and greedy eyes. After welcoming the group into the city hall, the few cloaked figures exchanged glances with each other and sneaked into a nearby alley. Now not only have the Radiant Knights appeared, but even the Dragon Knights have come. This must be reported to Lady Mary as soon as possible. All right, I'll set off immediately. You guys continue to keep watch here. If the 2 Dragon Knights make any big moves, be sure to report it immediately. Yes, I understand. Hurry up and set off. Be careful on the road. Chapter 191. The banquet was still going on. Aristocratic ladies dressed in gorgeous clothes. Young girls as shy as deer, sexy and enchanting beauties. These beautiful women, who were rarely seen, were now crowding around him in groups, covering their lips with silk fans and giggling. Some were blushing and snuggling up to him, while others were casting flirtatious glances at him. Although the quality of the beauties here was far from as elegant and noble as that of the palace, they were more colorful and available for anyone to pick from. After much effort, Jefferson finally got rid of the entanglement of the beauties and met with a dozen Knights of Light who had been waiting in a secret room behind the city hall. Veery, come and introduce us. I want to know how your preparations are going. As soon as he stepped into the secret room, the faint smile on Jefferson's face disappeared, replaced by a strong, killing intent. The dozen Knights of Light bowed, respectfully before sitting down. Veery, who was in charge of this operation, came forward to introduce the gathering of the Knights of Light. 7 from Gutland City, 11 from Kovar City, 8 from Shever City. So far, the number of demon hunters gathered in Hiduran City has reached 1,513. The Knights' camp is being expanded, and supplies and equipment are being transported. Knight Gutland is in charge of the training. The previous team of Knights, led by Nying, has arrived in Blue Hill City, but there is no news from them. Jefferson suddenly interrupted Veery's introduction. How long has it been since Nying set off? It's been 7 days. Veery hesitated for a moment. When they arrived in Blue Hill City 3 days ago, they reported that they had found some unusual phenomena there. But after that, there was no contact. Send someone to contact them as soon as possible and tell them not to go in alone. You may have heard about the invasion of this plane. It's not that the creatures of the outer realm broke in unintentionally, but a more powerful material plane that has their eyes on us. So to prevent them from taking root here, we need to drive them out before they have a firm foothold. A Grade 3 Dragon Knight was almost the top force in this plane, and his words undoubtedly carried great authority. Hence, the many Radiant Knights could not help but look at each other, their minds filled with shock and fear. Finally, Knight Veery couldn't help but ask, Sir Jefferson, can you determine which plane the intruder came from? It doesn't matter which plane they're from, as long as you know that their plane's level is higher than ours. Jefferson was also full of worries. As long as they don't come from those terrible large planes, then there is nothing to be afraid of. After all, this is our world. Even if they manage to squeeze their way in, they will be severely restricted by the laws of the plane and won't be able to display much of their combat power. Don't forget that Lord Willis possesses the power of Tier 4, the limit of this plane. The Radiant Knights present nodded in agreement to the Great Dragon Knight Jefferson's words. The upper limit of power in the Night Plane was 4, and no outsider could surpass this limit. If an outsider's strength had already reached Tier 4, the planar laws would weaken their strength the moment they entered the Knight's plane. At that time, how could they possibly resist Lord Willis, who was at the peak of Tier 4? Even if the intruder's strength exceeded Tier 4, after entering the Knight's plane, his strength would be suppressed to Tier 4. At that time, it would be hard to tell who would win. However, the Demon Hunter Knights had the home advantage. If they were to really fight to the death, they would always have the advantage of numbers. This was actually the biggest psychological advantage of the people present. However, just as the high-ranking Demon Hunter Knights gathered together for a silent discussion, there were 3 to 4 black shadows silently shuttling back and forth in the night sky above the city lord's mansion. On the ridge of the secret room where they were gathered, a basin-sized vampire bat covered in pitch black fur retracted its wings and slowly crawled on the roof. This was, after all, a kingdom of knights, and the control and use of mysticism in all aspects was still very shallow and crude. In the sorcerer world, any alarm spell formation or protection spell formation will be able to protect the secret room from any prying eyes from the outside world. However, here, there is no large-scale use of mysticism power. Therefore, when this group of high-ranking demon hunters gathered together for a secret discussion, the main means of defense was to send a few demon hunter knights to stand guard and patrol. With this method, they could indeed prevent most of the prying eyes from the outside world. However, when their enemy was not humans, but a group of mysterious sorcerers from another plane, this method of fixed guards and mobile patrol was too simple and crude. Even if they racked their brains, they would never have thought that the eavesdroppers would actually come from the sky. When a vampire bat stopped flapping its wings and slowly glided down from the dark night sky, even the Demon Hunter Knights who were vigilant and sharp could not detect it. Seeing that one of their companions had successfully landed on the roof of the secret room, the rest of the bats quickly flapped their wings and flew towards the square in front of the city lord's mansion. From afar, even though they were 2 miles away, they could still clearly see the 2 huge green dragons crouching on the brightly lit square. At this time, a heavy carriage was slowly entering the square. The carriages were no longer loaded with miscellaneous items like grains, fruits, and vegetables, but large livestock that were screaming in fear. From the looks of it, they should be the Salo beasts, a creature similar to domestic pigs on Earth, that the natives of this plain reared the most in captivity. Perhaps they had smelled the stench of the giant dragons that were at the top of the food chain in this plain. The cows, sheep, and Salo beasts became agitated as soon as they entered the square. Their ear-piercing screams and cries filled the air of the silent square. Hearing the cries of their food, the two green dragons instantly raised their long necks and opened their mouths slightly. Light green saliva dripped down from between their white, shiny fangs. The viscous saliva was obviously highly corrosive. When it dripped onto the ground, it would sizzle and corrode small holes on the bluestone floor. The two green dragons couldn't hold back their desire to eat. They suddenly climbed up from a floor and leaped to the side of the carriage. They opened their mouths wide and bit the partition of the heavy carriage into pieces. Then they pressed the cows and sheep under their front claws and ate them in big mouthfuls. Although the green dragons were top-notch magical beasts, they were still wild beasts. Therefore, the scene of them eating was tragic. They did not even care about the safety of the human servants around them when they ate. When the driver saw the giant dragons pouncing on him, he quickly jumped off the carriage and fled. If he was too slow, he would either be lifted into the air along with the carriage by the giant dragons and fall to his death, or become a dessert in the giant dragon's meal. The two green dragons had obviously enjoyed countless offerings from humans. Therefore, they were extremely picky when it came to eating. Many of the cows and sheep, they often only ate the most delicious parts of the meat. They would use their huge bodies to pounce on the food and use their sharp front claws to press it down. Then, they would use their sharp fangs to bite off their favorite parts. As for the rest of the body parts, they would just throw them away. The whole process was bloody and cruel. Therefore, in just a short while, the clean and tidy municipal square had become a bloody slaughterhouse filled with the blood of the animals. Of course, the few little things floating in the dark sky in the distance did not escape the green dragon's powerful sense of smell and elemental perception. The green dragon Isonly raised his head, and through his amber eyes, he scrutinized the little bugs that had a hint of a dark aura. After struggling in pain for a while, he finally gave up the urge to fly into the sky to kill them. They were just a few bugs with weak, dark elemental waves. They should not cause too much harm to this human city. Moreover, his master had warned him time and time again not to let him prey in the human city as he pleased. Therefore, with delicious food in front of him, the green dragon Isonly quickly forgot about the few annoying little bugs and focused on enjoying the offerings from the humans. It was the first time that a mutated creature like the vampires had appeared in the Plain of the Knights. Otherwise, the green dragon Isonly would not have ignored them so easily. If the green dragon could hear the conversation between the vampires from a distance of 2 miles, Isonly would swear to turn them into ashes even if he had to chase them to the ends of the world. I didn't expect these green dragons to eat food from the humans. Yes, maybe this is our chance. Yes, it must be the blessing of the blood ancestor that made these 2 big lizards so stupid. Inform the blood ancestor immediately and get her to think of a way to get some powerful witch medicine. If we get rid of these green dragon medicines, maybe we can have a chance to taste the dragon blood. That's a great idea. You guys keep watch here. I'll inform the blood ancestor now. The few vampires floated in the dark sky, watching the green dragon's every move as they discussed animatedly. Soon, a vampire bat turned around, flapped its wings, and flew higher and higher, then turned around and flew in the direction of Blue Hill City. However, at this moment, in another secret room in the City Lord's mansion, Grand Duke Ellington was also having a secret discussion with a group of loyal subordinates and subordinates. Still haven't figured out their real goal? The one who spoke was Grand Duke Ellington, who was frowning. There's no definite goal. An elderly general in golden armor shook his head and said, perhaps they don't even know what their target is, but they've been expanding the camp outside the city. I've personally gone to take a look. The expanded camp can accommodate at least 3,000 demon hunters, a young general said in a low voice. 3,000? That's so many. Heavens, that's 3,000 demon hunters. Even in the last war of evil, I'm afraid there weren't so many demon hunters. We can't let them continue like this. Even with the number of demon hunters they have now, it's already a serious threat to Hiduran City. How many more soldiers can we mobilize from the surrounding cities? Grand Duke Ellington asked calmly. Currently, Hiduran City has gathered 20,000 city guards. Together with your 10,000 Lord's Guards, we can maintain a 25-1 advantage. But if their numbers continue to increase, it will be difficult for us to maintain the balance of our forces. My liege, you know that using the city guards to fight against the Demon Hunter Knights is no different from sending them to their deaths when they have less than 20 times the number advantage. The old general's words resonated with everyone, and they could not help but hang their heads low. Using a mortal army made up of commoners to fight against demon hunters with supernatural powers, without an absolute advantage in numbers, there was almost no hope of victory with just excellent tactics. Therefore, facing the demon hunter's army, the many broken hair knights, radiant knights, and the 2 dragon knights who were so powerful that they could only despair, the people could not muster up the courage to fight against them. Chapter 192. Mary sneaked into Hiduran City near dawn. Apart from a large number of blood thralls and derivative bodies, Grimm, Kogan, and Farrell were also with her. They broke into a noble's villa that was closest to the municipal square. In less than a quarter of an hour, they had taken control of more than 50 people in the villa. If it wasn't for the fact that they didn't want outsiders to notice anything unusual, it would have been easier to just kill these people. But now, Farrell, who was an expert in witchcraft potions, had turned them into obedient puppets with lost heart powder. Farrell sounded like a very feminine name, but the owner of the name was a rugged male wizard. According to Kogan, Farrell was indeed a woman when she first became a wizard, but she had turned into her current appearance due to a witchcraft accident. Of course, this was only the appearance. As for whether Farrell was a man or a woman, no one knew. Grimm and the others had no interest in this at all. Grimm had long since given up all hope of becoming a wizard. Anyone who could become a wizard was definitely not a normal person. Judging from the enthusiasm and thirst for knowledge among the wizards around him, they were no less than the great scientists on Earth in his previous life. The scientists on Earth, on the other hand, had great minds and brilliant ideas, but most of the time, they could only curl up in their laboratories, unable to turn their fantastic ideas into reality. That was why the scientists on Earth thought a lot, but did little. They were limited by their own strength and financial ability, and most of their ideas were just wishful thinking. But the wizards in this world did not have such restrictions. They were like a group of mad scientists who had been freed from their shackles. Not only did they have the madness of a scientist, but they also had the ability to turn their madness into reality. The last point was actually the most terrifying. After Mary and the others settled down, the first thing they did was to set up a concealment barrier in the villa and use the power of witchcraft to conceal the overly obvious elemental fluctuations on their bodies. After that, they hid in the room and secretly peeped at the 2 terrifying green dragons who were sleeping soundly on the square. In order to conceal themselves, Grimm took off his black wizard robe and changed into a noble hunting suit. This was a type of tight-fitting clothing that nobles would wear when they went out for sightseeing, hiking, or hunting. The lower body was leather pants, suitable for riding horses. The upper body was double-breasted, somewhat similar to the tight-fitting vests on Earth in his previous life. With Grimm's height of 2 meters, coupled with his elegant and elegant clothes, his dark red hair that reached his shoulders, and his handsome face, he exuded a heroic aura. After all, he had only been a wizard for a short period of time, and his soul had not been completely twisted by the strange and evil witchcraft. Therefore, after dressing up, he immediately became a noble young man with a different temperament. Mary, on the other hand, was wearing a bright red palace dress. Her beauty was like a bottle of rich red wine, enough to drown most human men. The two of them were dressed in such a way that they complemented each other. There was a kind of temperament of a noble man and an enchanting noble woman, causing people to look forward to the fantastic scene of them dancing in the crowd. However, as soon as the other two magi put on the human noble clothes, they showed strong unnaturalness and distortion. The smell of magi on their bodies was too strong, and the viciousness and cruelty between their brows could not be erased. However, Kogan and Farrell did not seem to care about this at all. They looked at Grim and Farrell and could not help but smile sinisterly. These two had just become magi, and they still had too many human emotions and traces. They also had enough passion, and it was time for them to crazily enjoy themselves and vent their emotions. After experiencing the vicissitudes of life for nearly 100 years, enjoying all the delicacies, beauties, and supreme authority in the world, they would finally realize that on the path of magi, endless knowledge was the only thing worth pursuing for eternity. Therefore, when Kogan and Farrell saw Grim and Farrell, they could not help but think of the madness and wildness they had when they had just become magi. Naturally, their expressions became extremely strange. Grim was not in the mood to slowly ponder the psychological problems of these two old monsters. He walked to the wide wooden window and lifted a corner of the curtain, silently observing the vague outline of the huge green figure in the distance. Since he could not casually cast spells, Grim could only rely on the passive detection ability of the AI chip to silently sense the strength of the two green dragons. "What? Did you find anything?" Kogan walked to the other side of the window and secretly peeped outside like Grim. These should be two green dragons that have just matured, one male and one female. As for their strength, I can't see clearly, so I can only make a simple guess. Grim's brows furrowed. It was obvious that the strength of the green dragons was what he was most concerned about. "Oh, you can even tell a gender?" Kogan, who was beside him, was stunned for a moment. He rubbed his eyes and looked carefully for a long time, but all he could see were the smooth lines of emerald green dragon scales. There was also no sign of a male or female on the body. Grim laughed dryly. "Don't think about looking at the obvious characteristics of their gender. Just look at their dragon horns and body. The dragon horn on the left is rough and messy, and the curve is larger. The body is also stronger, so it's definitely a male. The dragon horn on the right is short and delicate, and the body is slightly slender, so it's definitely a female." After hearing Grim's reminder, Kogan looked carefully again and indeed found some clues from these minute differences. "This is what you read in the books as well?" Kogan asked in surprise. "There's an introduction in the 3rd chapter of the Book of Dragons. There's also a description in the summary chapter of the Encyclopedia of Draconic and—" Grim answered seriously. "Wait, where did you find these books? Did you already plan to slay dragons?" Kogan was dumbfounded. "I found them by chance in the library of the Dark Crypt Magus Tower, so I memorized them easily." Kogan tilted his head and looked at Grim as if he was sizing up a monster. He could not help but frown and mumble, "Don't tell me you have a gift like encyclopedic knowledge? I don't get it. I don't get it." Soon after, Kogan could not help but ask, "Since you can tell the gender of a dragon, can you tell the strength of the two green dragons in front of us?" Grim curled his lips and said, "Young green dragons already have the strength of a magus. They're already adults, so they're definitely above grade 2. But considering that they're still very young and that the elemental energy in this plane is extremely scarce, they're definitely not at grade 3. They should be at or around the middle of grade 2. Kogan nodded silently, agreeing with Grim's judgment. Although the two green dragons had not reached the grade 3 that they were afraid of, just their grade 2 strength was enough to crush the 4 of them. To put it bluntly, just these two green dragons alone were enough to destroy the entire Magus camp. While the two were talking in low voices, Mary pushed open the door and entered the room. "The things have been brought back. They're all in the kitchen downstairs." Mary could not help but cover her nose, gently fanning the air in front of it. "Those things are so smelly. I definitely don't want to touch them." Farrell smiled faintly, turned around, and walked out of the room. Dragon dung was something that normal people avoided, but for potion masters like them, it was a good ingredient for potions. Besides, didn't they invite him to come here just for him to concoct a special kind of magic potion that was especially effective against dragons? With the powerful physique and outstanding magic resistance of the giant dragons, they could be directly immune to low-level witchcraft. Ordinary poisons and paralyzing potions would have no effect on them at all. Therefore, poisoning them with potions was pure wishful thinking, but finding a way to paralyze them for a while was still possible. External curses and attack spells would not be able to penetrate the scales of the green dragons, not to mention arrows and daggers. Therefore, any external attack would not work without alerting a grade 3 Dragon Knight. Using a potion to paralyze a dragon was the most unreliable method, but it just happened to be the most suitable one. In order to make the lives of the 2 green dragons more comfortable, the city hall hired a group of poor people to take care of their daily lives, transporting live livestock, cleaning up the leftovers and dung. This kind of work was extremely dangerous, and ordinary people would never want to do it. Only those poor people who were willing to do anything for a meal would dare to take the risk. Therefore, Mary sent a few vampire subordinates to bribe a few poor servants at a high price to secretly transport a batch of green dragon feces and saliva. With these things, Farrell, as a professional potion master, will be able to make a potion that could paralyze the green dragons. Farrell opened up a small secret room downstairs to concentrate on making the potion, while Mary sent a large number of vampire subordinates to gather information about Haduran City. As for Grimm and Kogan, they were waiting by the window, silently observing the changes of the 2 green dragons. The operation was set for tonight because, according to the information they received, there would be a large-scale live feeding before midnight. Therefore, if they had any ideas, they would have to do it around this feeding. However, at dusk, something suddenly happened in the square. A dragon knight walked out of the city lord's mansion, surrounded by a crowd. Then, after a brief farewell, he rode on a green dragon and soared into the sky, whistling sharply as he headed straight for the east. Chapter 193. 2 green dragons. One was gone, and the other was left behind. This would undoubtedly be more convenient for the operation at night. However, the giant dragon that left made people have some bad associations. When it flew away, it was very likely to go to Blue Hill City. The combination of a level 2 green dragon and a level 3 dragon knight made up for the danger of knights being easily kited by mages. If something happened to the wizard camp or Blue Hill City, all the previous efforts would be in vain. They could not afford to lose the rear. Therefore, Mary sneaked out of Haduran City and used witchcraft to communicate with the remaining 3 wizards in Blue Hill City, passing on the information about the dragon and the dragon knight. As for the original poaching plan, it was still going on. The dragon knight flew extremely fast. If something went wrong in Blue Hill City, it would be useless for them to chase after him. Therefore, it was better to stay here and wait for an opportunity. After all, according to their calculations, the possibility of poaching the green dragon was extremely high, and it would be a pity to give up just like that. Hence, after a simple meeting, the few audacious fellows left the noble's villa with malicious smiles on their faces. The green dragon Lysana was bored. As a young female dragon, Lysana was only 118 years old this year, which was the age of the dragon race's most vigorous life and the most thirsty for wealth. Because she had just left the dragon cliff for less than 6 years, Lysana had not had the time to create her own nest. Although the Kingdom of Knights had built a magnificent palace for her and filled her bedroom with glittering gold coins, the Kingdom of Knights had built a magnificent palace for her. But there were not many treasures that could really attract her. In these 6 years, she did not have the opportunity to travel alone to plunder wealth. Most of the time, she could only curl up in the fake palace and sleep to pass the time. Their days were boring and depressing. This was a continent ruled by humans. There were all kinds of human cities, large and small, and the treasuries of each city were filled with the wealth of the drunken dragons. Unfortunately, most of these human cities had owners and were protected and blessed by the Kingdom of Knights. In the Kingdom of Knights, there were many terrible, strong people that even the dragons were afraid of. In order to obtain her own wealth and power, the newly matured female dragon Lysiana responded to the great knight Karek's call and became the contract partner of a powerful Tier 3 knight. He seemed to have heard from Kalek that they were going to the Greenland forest to fight against some evil invaders. Lysiana wasn't interested at all. Lysiana was disdainful of these little bugs that used the plane's loopholes to sneak in. Who was it? She was the prettiest, youngest, and most powerful green dragon Lysiana in the past century. The number of young green dragons pursuing her could fill up an entire Dragon Valley. Hymns praising her beauty could be chanted continuously for 3 days and 3 nights, and the number of human knights envious of her bravery could form mountains and seas. But now, she could only curl up on the damp and cold stone floor, using a sharp dragon claw to gently poke at the corpse of a human servant, killing time and boredom. One unlucky guy. He actually stood in front of the great Lysiana when she was in a bad mood. Lysana's breath was only a little heavier, but the dragon's breath, which carried a pale, green, poisonous mist, had already poisoned the unlucky guy. At first, the unlucky guy could still twitch on the ground, but after 2 more mouthfuls of Lysana's poisonous breath, he completely stopped moving. The other human servants who served her shuddered in fear, their faces pale. One of them even emitted a disgusting smell of urine. Lysiana swung her long, thorny tail like a meteor hammer, and the poor guy was turned into a pile of unrecognizable meat paste. However, just as she was getting more and more bored and was wondering if she should kill another human to relieve her boredom, the sound of wheels came from the road outside the square. As the heavy carriages drove into the square, the mournful cries of livestock rang out incessantly. Is it time to eat again? The green dragon, who had just eaten yesterday and was not that hungry, seemed a little lazy and listless. Lysiana raised her nose and gently sniffed. She suddenly stood up and stared at one of the heavy carriages with her big dragon eyes. It was a group of slightly thin goats. As they were raised in captivity, their meat was far less delicious than wild goats. However, the green dragon vaguely smelled a trace of drunken dragon fruit from one of them. Drunken dragon fruit was a special fruit that dragons liked to eat the most. Although they were small in size, they had the strange effect of making giant dragons feel intoxicated and hallucinate. Of course, the effect of drunken dragon fruit on other creatures was not obvious, but it was limited to dragons. Therefore, it was a plant that had to be planted near Dragon Cliff or Dragon Valley. Dragons were never good at taking care of these delicate and fragile plants. Moreover, dragons had huge appetites, and each time they ate an astonishing amount of fruit. That was why dragons often enslaved some weak servants to clean their lairs, guard their territories, and take care of the plantations that dragons loved. It was beyond Lysana's imagination that she could smell the drunk dragon fruit outside the Dragon Valley. Could it be that this goat ate drunken dragon fruit by mistake? With a trace of doubt, Lysiana lowered her huge head and opened her dragon's mouth. With a curl of her nimble tongue, the special goat was sucked into her mouth and chewed lightly. The stinky goat blood had a trace of drunken dragon fruit smell, but after tasting it carefully, it felt like there was some other mysterious substance mixed in. This feeling is a little strange. The green dragon, who was silently savoring the taste, suddenly opened her eyes wide. She vaguely felt that something was wrong. She could not even feel the existence of her own tongue. Just when she felt that something was wrong, a strong numbness quickly spread in her mouth, and quickly spread from her dragon's mouth to her stomach. Lysiana could no longer support her heavy dragon body and fell on the square with a bang. Seeing the green dragon fall, the 4 people hiding in the noble's villa did not dare to delay. They immediately used all kinds of methods to rush to the green dragon's side. Although Wizard Felicia, who was a potion maker, had specially enhanced the effect of the potion, it was not realistic to use these simple ingredients to completely defeat a Grade 2 green dragon, especially one with a highly toxic body. Therefore, the paralysis potion made by Wizard Felicia could only paralyze the green dragon for 3 minutes at most. If they could not use these 3 minutes to find a way to kill the green dragon, once the effect of the potion wore off, none of them would be able to escape from a berserk dragon. Although Mary was the fastest among the 4 of them, Grim was still the first to reach the green dragon. A pillar of fire appeared in the middle of the square, and Grim, who had transformed into a flame demon, walked out of the pillar of fire with a sinister smile. He quickly waved the flame scepter in his right hand, and a giant fire spirit wrapped in raging flames appeared nearby. It looked around, roared towards the sky, and rushed towards the city guards standing outside the square. This was not the end. As Grim strode forward, the secret voodoo scroll automatically flew into his left hand, and he quickly flipped through it. Every time the parchment paused on a page, a powerful fire spell would instantly condense and fiercely bombard the green dragon's huge body. As soon as a violent fire core explosion was completed, another red pillar of fire with the green dragon in the center shot up into the sky. The fire subsided a little, and the next magma fireball bombarded the green dragon. By the time Grim's 3-meter-tall body arrived in front of the green dragon, the 5 instant-cast spells stored in the secret voodoo scroll had all been used up, and the green dragon's body had turned into a sea of lava. The 5 berserk spells not only had a powerful fire element power, but also had a huge physical killing effect. The green dragon's curled-up body had been bombarded black, and the ground it was lying on had sunk in, forming a crater that looked like a crater. However, even after being bombarded by such violent spells, the green dragon's body did not show any obvious damage. Although some of the dragon scales at the center of the explosion had been distorted by the terrifying heat, the dragon scales were still able to resist most of Grim's spells. Seeing that the spells were not effective, Grim threw away the secret voodoo scroll and the Flame Lord's elemental crystal core. He then roared towards the sky, and the flames around his body began to crazily shrink into his body. Soon, a giant sword was condensed in his hand. At the same time, Mary's ghost-like figure appeared in the square. She pulled the blood-red longbow in her hand to the fullest, and a long arrow with faint blood-red runes gathered on the bowstring. Soon, when the aura and power were condensed to the peak, Mary shouted in a deep voice. The blood-red arrow turned into a long rainbow and instantly sank into the green dragon's abdomen. The green dragon's whole body was covered with emerald green dragon scales, but the scales on its back and sides are the thickest, while the scales on its throat, neck, and abdomen were the thinnest and densest. Most of Grim's spells were aimed at these thin dragon scales, and the green dragon's body was full of holes. As the dragon scales crumbled, a lot of fresh blood, flesh, and bones were revealed. Mary's blood-red longbow shot directly into the damaged part of the dragon's scales. The arrow penetrated the green dragon's body, and the violent blood-red energy directly exploded in the dragon's flesh. Suddenly, blood spurted out from the green dragon's abdomen, and the sticky blood was mixed with broken organs, minced meat, and purplish-black dragon blood. Although its body was paralyzed and could not move, the green dragon Lysiana still let out a mournful cry of pain, and it was obvious that she was asking for help. At this time, Corgan, who was covered in black smoke, and Feral, who had a pair of green wings on her back, had also arrived at the battlefield. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.